And good evening from Philadelphia. Frank here with yet another episode of UFO News Network Sunday tonight on a Tuesday. We're ready to go. We've got a fantastic show. Let's not keep our guests waiting much longer. They've been in the news quite a bit over the last year regarding the UFO subject matter. So let's get the details from co-host Chant Hannah. How you doing, Chant?
I'm doing great. We have a very special show tonight. Our show is it's going to be fascinating, actually. This show is going to go over how Thomas Reed's UFO incident is making U.S. history. It's a really unusual situation going on nationwide and actually worldwide. I wanted to actually give a little bit of background regarding Thomas Reed's very special person. He's the original owner of the international model and artist group Miami Models and Heroine Entertainment, founded in '94, and also in early life from 1960 through 1962, Reed lived in the home of William Roosevelt, the grandson of President Roosevelt, in Cherry Hills, Colorado. His mother and grandmother were employed by the Roosevelts with residence on the property. His father, Dr. Howard Reed, an attorney and Connecticut politician. His first break was in 1981 while working at Stage and Lighting, at a coordinator for Fashion Runway in Hartford, Connecticut. Soon thereafter, he accepted the position of... I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What was that? I'm sorry. Yep, yeah, there's a little bit of break there. Sorry about that. His first break came in 1981 while working as Stage and Lighting coordinator for Fashion Runway in Hartford, Connecticut. Soon thereafter, he accepted the position of stage manager and photographer for Club Getaway, where his work was noticed by Danielle Gallo, an editor for Penthouse. Gallo invited Reed to Omni Penthouse in '86, and he was introduced into slide film and studio Lightbox. He married and found opportunities in Miami Beach shooting model composite cards for renowned agencies. And Reed's years in the fashion industry showcased his talents, winning the Miami Newcomer first place in South Florida's image competitions. In '94, Miami Models was born, and by 1999, the model management firm was renowned for European print, fashion, and runway. Reed has been the subject of over a dozen documentaries and or feature films with numerous guest appearances as himself. Reed was also an associate producer for the syndicated television series Today's Health with tennis pro Chris Evert, as his agency provided the talent for 5-star productions. That is the IMDb bio that I'm reading directly from their website regarding our wonderful guest today, Thomas Reed. I'd also like to read the bio of Judge Kevin Titus of the 30th District Court. He's a fascinating person, and he is integral to the story, indeed instrumental to it. Judge Kevin Titus is a renowned historian who specializes in U.S. history. He is a TV personality of the Ancient Aliens TV show. He will be in the recently filmed movie Inducted with Tom Reed. He has published 2 books regarding U.S. history. He's a Connecticut justice of the Tom Reed case of '69 and has played an instrumental role regarding this historic UFO-related case. He is the first individual in history regarding any UFO-related case to specifically declare the Tom Reed case documents to be filed and categorized as authentic and historically significant in U.S. history. Kevin was a young child at the time of the Tom Reed UFO incident and has his own connection to this event additionally. The papers signed and sealed by Judge Kevin Titus on the Tom Reed case are at the UFO Hall of Fame in Roswell, New Mexico. Kevin is also a speaker and portrayer of historical U.S. presidents, which he portrays on TV and films as well. Multiple former U.S. presidents and vice presidents have written to honor him for his honest portrayals of their roles in history. Kevin Titus lives in Northwest Connecticut and occasionally in Texas, where he is known as a 1990s era bull rider at Texas rodeos. He loves riding horses, motorcycles, riding, and research history. Welcome, both of you, to our show tonight. Thank you so much for being on with us, Thomas and Kevin.
Welcome
Thank
aboard.
you very much. Yeah, thank you guys.
And
Hi, Tom.
Tom, we can skip all the UFO stuff and talk about working for Penthouse and all that too.
I wasn't. I
I'll
worked
be
for 'em,
okay with that.
but I was trained by them, and believe it or not, just to since you did touch on that, I was surprised you did. I actually turned down a job to work for them. As crazy as that sounded, but I would have had to take a train in, every day and that sort of thing. And I just thought it was going to be too much. And believe it or not, I rather shoot what I want to shoot than just a bunch of naked women and follow, and spotlights. You know what I mean? It's just, I know a lot of people still kick me in the head and they go, "Are you kidding me?" I'm like, no, I'd rather be creative, if that makes sense. When I shoot. Yeah. So,
and
yeah.
tonight, unfortunately, I'm sorry for our listeners, it's not about Penthouse.
Yeah, well, I've got to say then, listening to Tom tell that side of the story, we really have to give these erotic photographers a lot more credit, because it sounds like it's incredibly boring, and the sacrifice they must make day after day after day to entertain us.
What have I missed? What are you talking about?
Hey, so just one more thing. One of my bigger accomplishments early on was that I actually landed the 5-year packaging campaign for Love's Diapers. So when you went to buy Love's Diapers, those kids on those packages actually were my talent. That was my gig. That was my job. So you can't mix children and Penthouse. It just does not work.
It doesn't work. Oil and water.
No. Yeah. Anyway,
however, I know everybody wants to find out more about Penthouse and possibly be abducted by one of those ladies, and it's just not going to happen.
That's for a later.
We got a historical marker to that out there? I don't remember.
Right? Can we elaborate more on that? Anyway, I wanted to actually ask Tom a question. Could you please elaborate on 2 topics, and that is the Tom Reed UFO Park and the monument, the Historical Society, including any other memorial-related sites or plaques regarding your story?
All right. Well, I'd like to start by, I guess, telling you kind of how how this all came about really early on. Was that our diner actually was what was the catalyst for all this. It was the one spot that everybody would go to in the morning for breakfast and lunch. It was the only eatery in town. So that diner that we owned was really what launched all this, and the fact that my family owned it, because back in the day, everybody would eat breakfast there and then ride their little banana seat bikes across the street to school. And it's those kids today that, not Kevin specifically, but the Linda Farrells and the rest of them that have been going very public with this thing. They're the ones that were in that diner when all this took place, and everyone was talking about it, and their relatives saw it, and they saw it because the day it happened was actually Labor Day. So these kids that rode those little banana seat bikes and ate at our diner in the morning, because the buses didn't go to their homes directly. They would go to the end of the street. And so the moms would take their kids just to the diner rather than have them wait out in the cold and have to walk, 200 yards for the school bus. And so with that said, they were out having barbecues on Labor Day because it was a family thing. These kids saw this with their relatives, with their sisters, with their brothers, with family, with friends, with neighbors. So it was groups of people that saw this that day. And so with that said, that's why our diner became so the center of this, because that's where everyone talked about it. And it was the only place to eat in town. So they were forced to. And so with that said, in the 1980s, my father, who was an attorney, and people call him a politician, but he was a selectman in office for 8 years, and he was backed by Senator Christopher Dodd in his run for office. And he was a college professor and a historian himself. So when he was approached by Robert Blechman, who was another attorney in Manchester, Connecticut, with interest in our diner's story and what happened there, because my father, being a political figure and a pillar in the community, he wanted to reference my father's interest in this and involvement in this in support of the Hudson River Valley case, which Blechman was actually taking to the United Nations on October 2nd, 1992. And that was to be discussed with Mohammed Rabidin in support of 33-426. And it was. 14 years later, my father lost his life on that same date. So our family was approached by Fox News and then flown to Toronto, and all these people were like, did your father know something? Can I see the documents he had? So there was this interest in, was his death connected to this? So shortly after that, really, I got a call from a historian in Massachusetts, and they showed interest in holding a memorial for my father in support of this topic, because our diner and my father's involvement in the loss of my father at 54 years old, which was suspicious. He did die under questionable circumstances, I'll say that. And so did a doctor. And Bletchman passed not too much longer after my father, about 11 months later. So there was a lot of interest in that part of it and trying to memorialize something in respect for my father. So the historians decided to hold an event. And they actually were going to invite Stanton Friedman. I think Kathleen Martin was also mentioned at this meeting. And then 2 weeks later, I get this call saying, you know what, we just decided to put it to a census to see if there was enough here to show that this actually happened and your father was right. And all these kids today that saw this thing back in the day, they were calling the Historical Society, giving signed statements, giving notarize this, notarize that. And so they were flooded. And I was asked to take a polygraph test, and I did, and I passed it. And then the radio station got on board. We're the ones who broadcast it. And so they said, you know what, let's put it to a vote. And oddly enough, as I was floored, actually, I had no idea this was going to pass. And bang, next thing I know, we now have formally and officially inducted this case into history. There's too much here to say it didn't happen. So they sent all the records, the polygraph, the archives, everything they had to the Massachusetts Historical Society outside of Boston. And they said, we don't have anybody here who specializes in this topic. If we were talking about Paul Revere or the Boston Tea Party, we could, rebuttal some of this, but there's too much here. We're not going to say it didn't happen. They passed it on to the governor's office. And sure enough, Charles D. Baker said, well, if it's gone this far, I got no reason to say it didn't happen. And he signed it. Next thing I know, we made UFO history.
Just to jump in really quick, Tom, how many total witnesses were there, and how many of them were able to put together a statement for the this process?
It's a good question, because there was a lot more that they wouldn't allow. They were very adamant on, if you could not specifically say it happened on this day, they weren't interested. So there were over 250 witnesses, I believe, from several towns, because you could follow the flight of this thing, just like the Phoenix Lights. So there were about 250 people that wanted to give testimony and statements. And I think that was on Ancient Aliens, too. And I think Kevin knows more about that than I do, because he researched this part of it. But the Historical Society said, no, we are interested on September 1st, 1969. If you cannot swear it happened on that day, we cannot accept your testimony. And I thought that was really unfair, because we're going back a long ways. Sure, it was a holiday weekend. Sure, there was archives to back it up, and there were people who heard it on the radio and that kind of thing. But people were like, look, I remember it. I was a kid. I hung out in the diner. I was around that time. Well, if you can't specifically say it was for September 1st, we can't accept it.
I don't know anybody that can recall September 1st, 1969, what they were doing on that day.
Yeah. But a lot of people actually were with groups of people and family, and because it happened, they remembered it because they were eating in a diner the following day when it came over the radio, and they wanted witnesses to go back and call Tom J., who was a disc jockey at the local radio station. Right. And he was also a ham operator, so a lot of people had contacted him on ham radio. So those are the ones that were locked in. Those are the ones today that have stepped forward, never wavered, stuck to their guns and said, damn it all, we were there, we know what happened. And Kevin Titus is kind of one of those people.
I know that about 250 people or slightly more saw this object, which we're going to go into later in the show. But have you had more people come forward since then?
Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, I've had 2 more people this week who not only remember it, and actually one girl I talked to, her sister has news clippings from back then, so I can't wait to get those. She's actually in Sheffield. She's been collecting this stuff forever, and the only reason I was able to connect with her was that her sister Karen owns Gingras Lawn and Garden, and they just donated like 8 tons of rock, direct decorative stone for the park, and they're sponsoring a bench. And I was like, why the outpour? She goes, my sister's been collecting this info since the 70s. I'm like, oh my God, it's fantastic. So that's interesting. And of course, we got another sponsor today, Granite Sky out of that was today too. Was it New Hampshire? So there's more and more people coming on board now that I think it's become more welcomed. It's embraced more. It's bringing people together, oddly enough. And I wanted that to happen anyway, but I didn't realize the outpour. I think people just needed a spot to say, you know what, this is at the exact location. Somebody in our family remembers it. We know friends remember it if we didn't see it ourselves. And it's becoming it's becoming very popular. It's become a gathering spot. It's becoming so busy, we had to add 3 more benches. So, I mean,
Tom, remember Jan Green was made a specific eyewitness account, which is so believable. I mean, the woman's 84, and one of her famous sayings was, she doesn't care if she has Alzheimer's, she's going to remember to the day she died.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, too. There was okay, so when this happened back on September 1st, 1969, the radio station was actually off the air, theoretically. They played music, but the DJs were home. Everything was just looped back then, and so when people were making calls to the PD and the Sheffield Police Department, I think they called the Air Force Base, right, Kevin? I think they did that too.
Yes.
The National Guard office, and then they called the radio WSBS, and they called the Great Barrington Police Department. People just called everyone they thought would answer the phone, I guess, at this point, because it was seen by so many freaking people.
Within a 12-mile range, and we're talking about over 250 according to counts that I've researched, and none of those people knew each other, and so nobody could possibly have made something up like that. Something happened that day, and people were in panic over it from what we understand and what we see from the records.
Yeah, there was, I think it was Pittsfield, Stockbridge, Lee, Lenox, Otis, Canaan, Connecticut, maybe Litchfield, Connecticut, Sheffield, Massachusetts, New Marlborough, Massachusetts. There was a ski resort up there, and I can't think of the name of the place, Egremont, North Egremont. And so these calls came in from all over. So that craft or whatever was seen was actually originally on one side of the road. It actually crossed Sheffield's Route 7, which is where we ran into it. But to go back to Jan Green, so why Jan Green is so important was that she was actually in the car after driving down the road, and Tom J had actually gone back to the station because he was getting bombarded with calls over his ham radio. So he goes back to the radio station, gets back on the air, and goes, okay, I've got these calls from the police department. We're getting all these people leaving their numbers. Is this thing still in the air? Because if it is, I want to know where it is. And sure enough, Jan Green had actually heard that in her car. And her family used to own the local pharmacy in town. So she was, they were predominant. And so she says, you know what? I see it. So she ran right into WSBS radio, started pounding on the door saying, if you guys would just walk outside, you'd see the friggin' thing yourself. So I got this part in the film, and First Inducted, you see Jan just go bam, 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 bam on the door because they wouldn't answer the door because it was dark and they were closed. But Jan's like, come on, guys, open the friggin' door, answer your phone. It's right outside the friggin' radio station. And so that's when it was seen over Lake Mansfield by a family named Bowman. And so Bowman actually saw it. And then there's this Tom Warner in town who makes reference of seeing it too. And so you can actually follow it. There's a castle in Great Barrington, the Searles Castle. And a lot of people saw it around the castle because the castle was also like a place where people visited. So there were a lot of people there. And Lake Mansfield was only a couple miles from the castle. So in the air, you could see it. And then off to the right also was the country club, which those golfers actually were, getting ready to go and eat at the country club. And they were out there on top of this hill, and they saw it. And they're the ones who actually called and actually ended up getting it a Heineck classification back in the day. And then it went further down the road, and that's, we had left the horse show, and we were sitting at our diner getting it ready for the following day because it was open late because, again, it was a holiday. And so we had to be there late to clean up. And then we went across the bridge, and that's when we ran into it. And so then the following day, all these people came over the radio station. Well, we had a packed diner of probably, I don't know, back in the day, maybe 60 people. And they were all like, oh, my God, we did say, so-and-so told me about that. And so a lot of people think that event itself in a restaurant where this came over the radio is what stirred everything up. It's not. It's what brought it together, because until then, you only had a pocket full of people who were being taken seriously because everyone else thought they were nuts. Like, we were from New York. We weren't from Mass, you know.
You were just up there for the summer then, basically.
No. My mother got divorced in Colorado, and we decided to move back to where she grew up. You know, my grandmother's from Hollis, Queens. My father's from Patchogue. I was born in New York. You know, her family's from, New Rochelle, White Plains, all over New York. And so she didn't want us going to school there. She's like, you know what? My mother loved horses, right? My mother she's been riding, training race horses, and there was a racetrack in town. Great Barrington was known for the racetrack. And so she goes, I want to move back. I got some money, buy some land, have this wonderful Norman Rockwell upbringing for my children. And nothing could have been further from what we lived. You know what I mean? It was just insane, So we were outsiders to begin with, and this did not help. But you know what? If life was easy, I don't mind. I've always been one to go against the grain. I don't care what people think. I don't care what people, if they get upset with me about something. I stick to my guns. I stick to the truth. This is what happened, and I've done that my whole life. And my father, was on our, had our back in with the political connections. That helped immensely. And my mother, by the way, back in the day, was a radio personality for WKZE in Sharon, Connecticut. So my mother also had a voice on the radio. So, we kept it alive. We made sure that we knew that, in the area anyway, that this happened. And so a lot of people over the years have supported us. And so we thought, you know what? Well, maybe I can lease this land now, and maybe I can do something and pay something forward to the community that was involved in this, and save some face for these people too, for the non-believers or what have you, because there's still, oddly enough, a lot of naysayers when it comes to ufology or, us not being the most intelligent life out there. So, it's I don't insult anybody, but it is ignorance. Let's face it. And
a lot. I did want to bring up two totally separate things, but anyway, I'll start with one of them. I covered the Phoenix Lights event. It was a 7-hour event for me when I interviewed everybody there, talked to Dr. Linka Tai and multiple people who were witnesses of that mass sighting that thousands of people witnessed in 2 states and another country. And they all said, and across the board, and they've said 100% of the reports have been that sighting was empowering and positive. Now, this flyover of this craft, and we'll get into the specifics of that later.
Okay.
But this flyover of this craft regarding the 250 some odd folks or more that saw it, wanted to know, has it been universally a positive situation for them? Was it a positive experience? Or was it, oh my God, okay, they saw it? Or was it, no, this feels nefarious? Which one of those 3 or other do you feel like it's been most of?
Me?
Yes. Yeah.
I would say that the sighting itself, and those who encountered it, I wasn't the only one, or our family wasn't the only one. I'd say it was almost a privilege to see and be part of what we did. I think it answered a lot of questions about life and where we came from. I think it clarified a lot of things for us. But I think what was dangerous and what really was difficult for our family was the attitude of a lot of the people around it. The incident itself, I'd love to see another one. I'd love to go out there with my camera and go, son of a gun, there it is again. And I'm not one who's afraid of it. I don't think people in town were really afraid. I think people were just, it was different. See, back in Sheffield too, you understand this, and your listeners probably aren't aware that we had Command Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney. We had Sikorsky Aircraft. We had, what else am I missing here? Oh, Command Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney, Sikorsky, GE, Electric Boat, the Groton Naval Base, the Newport, Naval Base. The National Guard wasn't far from there. So there were a lot of people that were used to seeing things in the sky. And there were an awful lot of local pilots in the area, too, because, they would fly here, my family were all pilots. I was the only one in my family who didn't have a pilot's license. So small engine. And so I think it was very easy for people to kind of rationalize off what they saw originally, like, oh, that's got to be this, or that's got to be that. So they would go the what could it possibly be? Plus, I'll tell you something else. They were actually mining for magnesium, and the government was in town, basically in our backyard back then, because they were mining for magnesium for the atom bomb that was used back in the day. And after that mining for the atom bomb ceased, they continually mined for magnesium. So there was a government presence there too. So people would see government in the area. You had all these government manufacturing facilities, and then it came to be, the spin was, well, maybe something crashed, and because of all the local government, manufacturing facilities here, maybe they're working on something. Maybe they found something, kind of like the Area 51 thing. Plus, you had the Nike missile sites, you had the Minuteman missile sites, you had all the tunnels and stuff from the Cold War because you're up in the mountains. I mean, Sheffield, Massachusetts is like, I don't know, it's over 1,000 or 18 feet above sea level. So, and our farm was really high up too. So, to answer your question or circle around to it, I think people assumed at first that maybe it was something of ours.
Yeah.
And then it got to be, no, it hovered. And then it stayed there. And then all of a sudden, it shot over here. So it was easier for people to accept because of that. And I think that kind of resonated for a while. Then it was like, well, nothing happened. Nobody's hurt, maybe we saw something off-world. And that's how they labeled it back in the day. It wasn't considered a UFO. It was off-world. And that's why this governor's citation is worded off-world. So I don't know of anyone that would be scared of it. I mean.
Okay. And then the other question I have for you is, and I'm just going to go and parallel my question with the Phoenix Lights, and you'll see why. The Phoenix Lights, everybody, it appeared to them that this mass sighting was a big reveal, like the craft was flying over for a reason, so that people could purposely see it. Does it, again, we'll get into it later regarding what specifically happened to you, but do you feel like the craft was flying over repeatedly to reveal itself to masses of people? Did it come up?
No, it didn't. It didn't repeat itself at all. It was one flight. It was a jagged flight, but it was one. And then when it got to Sheffield, where we ran into it, it wasn't by itself. There were three pieces to it, which I think I showed you a picture of that.
Right.
You had these two big spheres that looked like about 4 times the size of a Volkswagen, and they came off of it, and they both went around a waterway. They were both hovering over water. So it was a 3-piece thing. I think it was a research type of thing. They were looking, and it was over water. So to me, I think it was, I won't say mining, but it was definitely interested in the water.
And the number of witnesses you mentioned, 250, is that just in the park, or is that total along this lengthy pathway that you described earlier?
That was within a 12-mile radius, and there was probably quite a few more, according to the accounts. It was amazing. People, it was like a bunch of people and within a 12-mile range saw this thing all over the place. And all the descriptions that we could find or historical record were absolutely like the same style of craft. That's what's so amazing about it.
Pretty accurate. Everybody's description is pretty much the same.
Yeah,
that always helps.
It looked like a turtle shell, to be honest with you, to some degree. And to comment on Kevin, too, the 250 calls, right, Kevin? There were 250 reports. But think about this. This was Labor Day, so those reports had families that witnessed it. So if you look at it, was just one call, but they had, sometimes several friends and family out having barbecues. There's a Gina and Melissa Paul and her father lived on our road, lived actually right next to the bus stop. I used to walk to school with Gina Paul and Marissa. And I was, and I would tell them, because we actually saw it beforehand, before September, 1st, we actually had seen it before. A couple of people did. And we would talk to them. And so on Labor Day, they actually were being called to the picnic table to eat. And they were out there in the field just staring at this thing, and their family all came over because the girls were pointing to these shapes in the sky that were starting to form different, like a circle and break apart. So the thing about this night was it wasn't just one object. It was one object that others came out of or came from, it seemed like. It could have been multiple objects, but it did look like it was something was coming out of it, these balls of light, and they would move and turn and spin, and then they would kind of go back and group and disappear and move on.
You had mentioned some police calls earlier on. Do we have any police officers as witnesses as part of the formal getting together of the monument, or did any of them come forward later on?
Yeah, we do. As a matter of fact, there's a couple of them that are going to in an upcoming show that we can't mention because of a non-disclosure. But yeah, we have several, and Detective Steve White, who I can mention, he investigated some of it. So yeah, there's officers, there's lawyers, there's judges, there's historians, there's bankers, there's politicians. It's amazing because, like I said, what makes this so unique is that those kids grew up to have professional careers and stuck to their guns, and so 50 years later, they're like, they're professionals, they're doctors, they have professional careers now. And a matter of fact, Louis, who was is a witness to several things. He owns 1,600 acres of property and 4 dairy farms. So these are not nobodies that have gone out on a limb to give testimony to the Historical Society.
Regarding this incident, which occurred on September 1st, 1969, and it making actually world history, not just U.S. history, I wanted to know, do you feel like this incident has permanently changed the community that you live in? In other words, do people feel like it's the same town anymore, or has it, how you can live in a small town and it's just always eternally that town? Did this incident permanently change the community? And if so, how?
I would turn that over to Kevin, I think. Yeah.
We can both tell you, but I'll let you tell you, Tom, and then I'll tell you the other aspects of it.
Oh, okay. I would just say, look at the park. I mean, the outpouring has been phenomenal. Now, you still have some naysayers. You still got all that, whatever. But yeah, I would say that it's brought the community together. And then you look at the city of Pine Bush, New York, who celebrates, the Pine Bush UFO Fair in memory of the Hudson River Valley sightings. And so now the city of Pine Bush is so supportive that they're actually holding the 50th year anniversary in Pine Bush. And then you look at Salem, the mayor of Salem, and my father was basically mayor. So there's a respect there. And so we had conferences and spoke in Salem. Ben Hansen was there with me, Travis Walton, I think Richard Dolan Skyped in, Mike Barr has been there with me, Nick Redfern's talked there. So involving our case, it's been welcomed in the Salem community. It's now welcomed in the Great Barrington Sheffield community, and it's now welcomed in Pine Bush. So you're looking at the entire area, all the events and all the odd history around New England, and believe me, there's a lot of it, kind of all support one another. And that's one of the, I'm glad you mentioned this because I want to say something else. For the longest time, I had to be very, very careful how I discussed this, what I said, the terminology I used, how I would, relay this to people, because the amount of support I've had within those, the amount of support I have and the credibility of those giving testimony, they had said to me, if we go out on a limb for you and we decide to do this, or we decide to vote on this and bring it into state, you need to make darn sure that you don't make us look stupid and overstate things. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And I haven't. I've been very conservative. There's so much more I'd love to say, but you understand, I can't lose the support of the city, state, and government. It was hard enough to get them to accept this to begin with. I'll tell you something else too. The governor, Charles D. Baker, there was a report out there that the citation was written in error. I want to clear that up really quick because that's nonsense. The governor signed the first citation, and a citation, a proclamation, any document that inducts or adds or registers any event in history into the archives of that state has to have a date of incident. Well, the first citation had my birth date on it. So he looked at the birth date and then signed off on it thinking that was the date of incident. So 2 weeks later, I get a call from the governor's office saying, we're going to reissue that, please, kind of disregard it. And so there was a second one that was issued in November. That's the citation that's always been on the monument. That's the citation that's floating around out there. But there was some negative reporter by the name of Terry Cowgill, who, if I ever see him, I'm really going to have. I wish I really don't want to meet up with him for a number of reasons. But he went out and put on the front page of an article of his. He was the editor for the paper, that the governor's citation was written in error. Well, technically, he's right. The first one did have an error. It wasn't written in error. It had an error in it. But did he say that the second one was issued 2 weeks later and it was corrected? So I said to him on the phone one day, I called him up. I had a couple of beers and I was like, you know what? So I called him up and I said, because he looks creepy.
Tom.
He looks really creepy. He's not someone you'd babysit. You know what I mean? So I called him up and I'm like, why would you do that? Why would you lead your readers? Why would you do something like that? And it comes out that he actually has an issue with my late father. Apparently, he just never liked the family. So you do get that. But aside from a few bad apples, I think this has brought the community together. There's a lot of a lot of support, and there's a lot of people donating things like that monument. A lot of people think, oh, well, who built the monument? Do you know the people in town built that? They paid for that. The locals paid for that monument.
Just real quick, you were talking about the response in the town. You've relocated. You don't live in the immediate area anymore. Do you have to change how you talk about this? Like if you're home, you have to sort of, or your current home, if you're home, you have to talk about things a certain way, if at all. And then when you get back to the old homestead, the old hometown, then you can be a little bit more open. You have to kind of adjust your message accordingly.
I would say there's truth to that. Sure. When I was speaking at the Phoenix Lights just a couple of weeks ago at the Historical Society, I opened up. I spoke for 3 hours and I was just like, hey, whatever. I'm just going to, let it out. I remember what we saw. I can talk more about that. And it's been 4 years now that this has been inducted. So for the first couple of years, you got to understand, too, I know you do, that these historians went out on a limb. It was pioneering. They knew they were going to, have a tough time selling this to certain people. It was one person lost their job over it. So, people were like, oh, come on, just let it resonate for a while. Please don't, go too far. Because the truth of the matter is the state and if you read the citations and you read the letters by the State Historical Society, you'll see that it refers to it as an off-world event, and that the event itself was established. The Reed's Diner altered the natural progression of the community over a UFO incident. But it doesn't say in there that they deemed an abduction case true. Okay, they don't say that. Therefore, if I go out in the paper and they write that, Governor Charles D. Baker inducted an abduction case, and they check with the governor, he's going to say, no, I didn't, because he didn't. He inducted a mass sighting, kind of like the Phoenix Lights, but a little bit more, we had front row seats. So there was more to it, but it was very similar to the Phoenix Lights. You can't say it didn't happen. The Phoenix Lights happened. It happened. Okay. Get over it. Right. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's kind of how this got inducted too. And so the governor and the Historical Society was like, just don't go out there and say we inducted an abduction case, because and we're going to have to deny that. We inducted an encounter, an off-world encounter. I'm like, I'm fine with that.
Okay, and so thank you very much for saying that. By the way, Thomas, I wanted to actually bring in, and that's great that you talked about that, because it's perfect segue to bring in Judge Kevin Titus of the 30th District Court, who we have with us tonight, who later sealed the records by Governor Charles D. Baker and the Historical Society, declaring them uncontested lawful documents. In 2018, the Historical Marker Database added the UFO monument to its library of official landmarks. Kevin, I wanted to ask you about that whole situation I just read right there from the website that Tom has, which is tomreed.net, regarding the off-world incident. Can you please go into detail regarding those sealed records by Governor Charles Baker and what you had to do with those records? Where is your connection regarding that?
Well, if you want to go down, there was a lot of different connections. It all began, if you want to make that brief, is when one day I was down at the Sheffield Cover Bridge, and what had happened was I walked across the bridge with my wife because we were looking at historical areas, and we saw this big marker. And I said, my goodness, that could be a marker to the Shays Rebellion. It was a thing that took place in that area around 1787, and which helped bring the Constitution to the United States. It's a big rebellion against taxes for people that hadn't, gotten paid in the Revolutionary War. However, as I went to the marker, I looked over and I looked at this marker and I said, oh my goodness, look at this interesting thing. And I said, you know what? I remember something like that on that weekend of Labor Day of 1969. And when I was reading the citation, the plaque, the original one that was on there previous that they had to replace, was up there. And I read it and I saw Thomas Reed's name. And I went, wait a minute. I know Thomas Reed. I know the Reed family. And I know that his father was a town selectman in Falls Village, Connecticut. He was very good friends with my grandparents, the Ryans, and he was one of the very few people that ever called my grandfather Jim. And so the next thing I was saying is I looked up, he said, I'm going to look into this because I remember something about this. I remember something occurring in my lifetime at that same time. And at that point, I went ahead and thought it made a point. I said, you know what, I'm researching this. I'm going to get into this deep. So what had happened when I looked at it, I finally contacted somebody, either the Historical Society or the Sheffield Police Department, to get word to Thomas Reed. And they did, and it was kind of funny because Tom had been contacted by somebody else and probably wondering whether I was some kind of strange, unusual person trying to reach him. And I realized that Tom and Reed, we may have knew each other, and we did know each other as kids with Peter Riley and Eddie Dickinson and people. We all knew each other in that little area back when we were kids. And what had happened was that I finally got a hold of him. He contacted me, and I said, Tom, you know what? He said he had a situation. He wanted me to look into it, and I did. I took it on, and I researched it. Now, to get back to your question, what I did was after I started the investigation, as I call it, to investigate the historical significance and let me create that as a permanent thing, I researched historical fact. And what I did is I looked into this matter very deeply, and I found records in Massachusetts. I found the records with the governor, and also Tom had given me various papers and documents and things of that nature. And I just went into it deeper and deeper. And when I found there were some government records for which is now the Great Barrington private airfield, now where I actually am training to get my pilot license. It used to be a military establishment up to about 1974. And what had happened was, according to a lot of accounts and actual military accounts, it stated that there was no airplanes. They said there was no helicopters up that day, but the radar technicians or the radar man saw something very, very strange that particular evening, and around that whole time period. So that got me more than thrilled to want to dig into this even more further. And as I did, Tom and I did further research. I found that there were witnesses. I found accounts of people that had stated what they had seen. I had met several witnesses, in fact. Jan Green was one of them. And like I said, their accounts are unrefutable. I mean, these people saw something. And these are not the kind of people who would make this stuff up. So you researched it deeper. And then I finally got involved with Tom Reed and more involved in making the park and establishing as what I want it to be a historical site. And that's what we've done now. We want to make it on the basis of a national historical landmark, something that's going to be sacred, like you would think of Gettysburg or Williamsburg or something of that nature. And the way the park's going, the way we've designed it, it's exactly the same as it was 50 years ago.
So the park is actually the site of the sighting then, is that about right?
Yes, it is actually the actual road. The bridge is a reconstruction of the original that Tom and his mother and grandmother and brother went across. It was they had to rebuild it because there were some kids or something that I heard burned it in 1994, and they had to rebuild it. Some of the old bridge is still there, but when you go across the bridge on our side, the UFO park, where Tom and the UFO, I guess corporation, am I right, Tom? We call it.
Yeah, it's actually a non-for-profit park now that I actually own.
Right, and there's been like Travis Walton, Fire and Sky, and so many other people have donated to it. I've donated. I put a brand new historical plaque that will be going up there. As I think you had a picture of it up there a little while ago. and that's going to be up as you come off the bridge on our side. That's the first thing that people are going to see. Now, when you go down the road and it goes down to the other end, you can go to the 2 cornfields that are a part of the very important story to this.
Yeah, that's a part you really took an interest in.
Right.
Yeah.
We can completely tell you, and my family has been there. My wife's family, Deanna's family's been there, and they have actually seen the corn. That it was the stalks were something like 15 feet to 20 feet tall, and the normal stalks are about 10 to 12. And when you take out an ear of corn, you pull it off, it's about almost half the size of your arm. That was pretty strange because right across the road on the other side, it's perfectly normal size. And there's been scientists have been over there and checked the ground, and the ground has got an unusual sense of radioactivity, you wish to call it.
Yeah, there was somebody there today with a Geiger counter. Do you know that?
Yes, I heard about that.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing what's over there. And we want to preserve this park. I mean, the 50th anniversary is coming up, and signing those documents, which you might want to know next, was one of the most important things to get this established.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I also wanted to bring up something interesting we talked about before the show, Kevin, and that is how weird the area appears to be after the incident occurred. Wanted to know if you can elaborate a little bit regarding how the crops in the area appear to be a different altogether, and then also maybe just if you could fill us in on that aspect.
Well, sure. We go there at different times of the season, Tom and I, and we have a lot of people. Todd and Leon and Michael Esposito, who takes pictures periodically for us to let us know how things are looking when I can't get out there or Tom can't be there. But I'll tell you one thing. It's unusual when you go out to the
just to jump in. Sorry to interrupt, Judge, but we've got some of the photographs of that Michael took in the slideshow. And how you wanted to give him credit for that.
Yes, I definitely want to give Tom and I. We want to give credit to Michael Esposito. He is a fantastic photographer, and he does a lot of this to update Tom and I about what's going on because he lives a little closer to that. I'm about 15 minutes away, and Tom, of course, is not in this area, but he's taking good pictures. He takes great pictures. He really does. But
there's one more thing if I can jump in too. There's also, I don't know if you remember the glowing of the people's sneakers they say they see in there, and the spots of that nothing will grow, and then you go across the way and everything's normal. You go on the other side of the road, everything's normal. You go on that side, and then there was crop circles that were showing up in 2012, 2013. Remember all that?
Right. I was just going to talk about that. My
BLT research,
my better half, she had her sister came up here with her family last year or the year before, and they came up and we took them out there to look at this, and she felt very strange when she walked out there, and I've never known anybody to say that before when she walked out there. She got unstable in certain spots where there's the circles down there, and you do feel a sense of eeriness, I guess you could call it, when you walk out there. And yes,
an undertow, right?
An undertow. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word.
That's how I feel.
When you walk down the road, Tom will contest to this. He has a weird feeling when he goes down that road. He feels very uncomfortable. I can't tell you what he feels, but he will tell you about it. But when you go down the road, my family walk. You can walk the entire road. It's the exact same road, and you can come to the telephone pole where I believe Tom, his family's car had come to a halt. Mm-hmm. And then you can look out to the field, which hasn't changed, where the craft was, I would say, northwest of the road, where it flew just above the treetops there. Mm-hmm. And when you walk down this road, you get a sense of history that you can't get anywhere else, because it's like, I guess you could say it's like going to Gettysburg and you walk the battlefields, but
it's almost spooky.
Huh?
It's almost spooky, and it shouldn't be. It gives you the creeps. Yeah. People
tend to feel uncomfortable at night when they go. Like you said, I've seen people, you can see it when you wear your shoes or sneakers and you go down the left side where all this occurred. It's been known that your sneakers shoes have glowed in a weird way.
Yeah.
And on the opposite side, nothing.
Yep. Ava Groves was there from Paranormal After Party. She was on the show for 3 years. She was there. She'll contest to it. Sean Payne Stowe was there. She'll say the same thing, that everything white was glowing. This guy, Paul, who was just delivering the benches, got so freaked out he left. And this is a guy who was just delivering some sponsored benches. So there is something really weird there. And I'll just to piggyback on that,
looking at the pictures, I've got some of the pictures up going
you
through them now.
You see the picture up right now? You see that one? How eerie that looks out there?
It doesn't look eerie at all in the photographs. I mean, it just I've got the bridge up right now.
Oh, the bridge. The bridge is beautiful.
Yeah, when you go down, if you've got the picture you have of the road, you'll see how it looks in the fields.
I thought it looked eerie. I don't care what Frank says. It looks.
Well, the
Frank,
bridge is beautiful.
You just need to go out there with us, and we'll give you a tour. We're going to give tours and everything to people. People come every day. When I was there in this freezing cold winter, filming Chronicles about it and Magic Markers episode, and I'm telling you, a bunch of people came out here. They came from Utah and Nevada just to see this site. Yeah. And people wish they could get a souvenir or something. So some of these people actually go out in the field and take some of the soil. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a more pointed question, and that is, both of you were kids at the time this event happened, September 1st, 1969. How old were both of you when this occurred?
Well, I guess I would have to have been about 13 or something like that, between 10 and 13. And I remember, because the property that I own now, it's 190 acres, is actually on part of the site where this so-called craft was actually spotted by our neighbors next door. And their neighbor and I, Jimmy and I, went up the top of the hill to go get some cattle that had been missing. And do you want me to tell you what we found up there?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, this is true. We went up. It was close to getting dark, but it was still light enough to go up. And the cattle had come down, and they were bringing them off the hill there, the mountain actually. And they came. There's a path that goes across the Hollenbeck River over there. And Jimmy and I were asked by his father George to go up there and check out the cattle. There were two who were missing. Well, we went up to the top of the hill. It took us a few minutes, and we were having a good time. And as we got to the top rise, I looked to the left, and here was one dead cow that had been mutilated to such an extent that I've never seen anything like that as a kid of my age. But it was a weird color. It was more of a pinkish color. It wasn't that a gory type of red you would see from something being eaten by an animal or a bear or a coyote or a wolf. It was weird. It scared me so much that Jimmy and I ran back down to the house. The second cattle was found later when he went up there on the right side, but we didn't stick around. I mean, you're at that age, you look, you know, what the heck is going on here, and you run down the hill. And as we ran up and got to the farmhouse of George and Jimmy's home, we looked up, and the whole family looked up and saw what seemed to be the type of craft that the Reeds saw on the same area. And this was all the San Lorena time, and it was very dim light, but it scared the living heck out of me. And I ran down, and I thought I was seeing things, and I didn't want to talk about it. But he immediately called the police, and other people called the police. And before you know it, everybody saw it within that area. And people were calling into WSBS radio. They were calling into the police, the local police. And, I mean, people were in panic. So we know that other people saw whatever it was. I can't explain to what it was, but just seeing the dead cattle alone was enough to scare a kid of my age out of his mind.
And the attention that the memorial has brought back to this case got a lot of media attention. I think at my newsfeed group on Facebook, I must have posted a half dozen different stories about it as it spread around the world over a period of time. How did all that happen? I mean, how did this story get such worldwide attention?
I think, Tom, maybe you could sell it, and I can fit in after the facts.
Well, I think, to be honest with you, I mean, it's never been a quiet case. It didn't make the news like Betty and Barney Hill or Travis Walton back in the day, because first of all, this is a town that didn't even have a middle school. you went from freshman to high school. I mean, it was a village. It was a very small town that,
Maybe a couple
prided
thousand
its.
people, roughly. A couple thousand, 3,000.
Even now, I think it's 3,000. Yeah, but it was outside one of the more affluent towns, which was Great Barrington, which was, I think, rated the #1 small town by Smithsonian back in 2012. So what you had a mix of people. You had a lot of New Yorkers going into Tanglewood and Music Inn, and Alice's restaurant was there. I grew up not far from Story Musgrave. So you had a lot of tourism and the Stockbridge, Music Inn, Frog Hollow thing going on. And then, but to get there, you had to go through this farming community. And, my mother being a single parent, really at the time couldn't afford to go to Ray Barrington, really. So she bought land in Sheffield, and that's where this whole thing started. So with that said, it was always talk in the area, Great Barrington, Sheffield, locals from the suspenders and bad breath and poor dental hygiene and tattoos and all this kind of thing that just didn't have a pot to piss in, that had mad at the world, and they were starting fights with the New Yorkers that were coming through to go to Stockbridge and Music Inn and Tanglewood and then stop at our restaurant to have a bite to eat. So this feuding, this arguing, this dynamic kept it alive all the time because it just never seemed to go away. And then in the 80s, when it was mentioned at the UN, and of course the passing of my father in the 80s, and then it was just a lot of people came out in support of my father because those who knew this happened knew that his efforts were genuine, that this was anything more than to say, look, this happened. And he confided in Bletchman and supported 33-426 and the Muhammad Ramadan thing where, Stanton Friedman was there and Linda Morton Howe was there. And so it was, kind of got attention was drawn back to it again. And then because of that, next thing we're on Fox, and then Discovery Channel does the season one episode of, Alien Mysteries, and everybody was like up in arms about that one because what they showed wasn't really what happened. They focused on, they mixed in the Kokomo boom from Indiana with our case. So people were like, what was all that about? And so I had a lot of people calling me like, I don't know why they would do something like that. And because that's, you tell them what happened and you go out on a limb and you just cross your fingers and hope that they tell it accurately. I mean, it brought attention to it. And so that's when everybody started, coming on board and saying, I remember this thing, why don't you talk to me, talk to my sister, talk. And so the next thing, the Historical Society is getting bombarded with stuff because they actually had posted something was run, or they didn't post it, but they interviewed in the paper, and it ran in the Berkshire Record and the Berkshire, Eagle out of Pittsfield. And then this is really interesting too. So one of my best friends, Len Morneau, who I've known since I was a teenager, lives in Avon, Connecticut. He collects art, antiques. He sculpts. He's got a lot of sculptures in his backyard. But he's also the brother of a Hollywood movie director named Louis Morneau, who produced Bats with Lou Diamond Phillips, retroactive sculptures in his Bellucci. And, of course, he did the Werewolf, the Beast Within Us not that long ago, which did very well. And Louis Morneau also lives next door to Oliver Stone in Santa Monica, California. So when all this was happening, Lenny was like, you got to get your hands around this thing and have it told honestly and preserve it, because these people that saw it are still alive today. They still live here. And some of these people are getting a little offended that something that they tell their family or they share with their family is not reflected fairly when they turn on, History Channel or Travel Channel.
Sure.
And so Lenny's like, you should talk to my brother. Maybe he can help, tell this in an honest, grounded fashion with actual testimony from these people before they're not here anymore. A lot, people are passing. Most of the witnesses are in their 80s.
Right.
And so sure enough, I was flown to Santa Monica, California, and I went to Pete's Coffee Shop and sat down with Louis. Been friends with his brother since I was 19. And so he contacted WSBS Radio and the Berkshire Eagle and said, you know what, if you guys can do a really good documentary or a book and get the facts and get this on record, I will do your film. I will do the movie, I will tell it honestly, and then nobody, because this needs to be preserved. People have lost their lives around it. A lot of people are passing today. A lot of people take this seriously. You've got governors backing you, judges backing you, lieutenant, governors backing you, radio stations, lawyers, doctors, historians going out on a limb for you, and then you do a TV show, and it focuses on the dramatic part of it, the fantastic, and then they want to add more fantastic, but then they leave out the facts. Like you were asking me, what's with the monument? How did this happen? How did this citation get signed? To me, that's the remarkable part of this. I'm no different than a lot of other people. How many people out there listening to this show right now have seen a UFO? I'm not alone in that. In there, what we bring to the table is that we are preserving of UFO history, and that needs to come first, because that's what I can give to this community. I can give this community roots. I can give it a foundation. Well, that's where we are right now, and that's why someone had said to me the other day, why don't you do this show? Because I turned it down. I'm like, I don't want to do it. I'm not going to benefit from it. It's only going to make it worse. I'm only going to have more to explain. Like even Ancient Aliens.
That's
yeah,
the key, Tom.
It is.
I wanted to bring that. That was an important part, Sandy, and everything. What the thing is about this is the fact that it's so historically significant, and to have such a park as we have now, it's a historical site. Call it a sacred site, call it a shrine to whatever. But the point is, it's something that happened 50 years ago this year, and it's still the same. And what you need to do, it's just like anything else in the culture today. There are people trying to remove American history or try to ignore it or forget it. This is a key. This is the first time in history that anything like this has ever been totally made significant. And as he said, Tom said, a governor for a state is now inducted it as part of their history. You have a judge who is me, who has researched it as a professional historian, and I realized that this thing was something that was not of the regular. It was something that needed to be preserved. And I assure you, I've done a lot of research. I've seen every document there is on it, and to put my seal, and to me to sign something like that is making my integrity. In other words, when I signed that, you can't change it. There's no law in the world that can change when a judge or a justice or anybody signs something that says, this happened, this is fact. You can't change it.
It becomes a memorandum of law.
And you guys did do the Ancient Alien show recently.
Sure.
And how was that presentation compared to the one that you weren't too happy about? How did all that come about, and how did you like the finished product?
Well, let me start with that, Tom, because you know more about it. I'd like to say it as my part in it was unique to the point where people got to see and hear me say that this basically is a historical event that took place. With so many witnesses. That's one of what I said in the movie. With so many witnesses, how can you say something didn't happen? How can you say it didn't? It's not true. The facts are there. Study the facts. You make the choice. You decide what you do or don't want to believe. But the point is, the facts are there. They're not made up. They're real. And to be on a movie to talk about it, or a TV show, to be a TV show to be who you are and to discuss it and show people what you see and what you're researching and what you're trying to tell the world about. It's quite an honor for me personally. I'm very excited about doing Inducted with Tom and a huge cast of great people. I think the movie's going to be one of the biggest of its time. I think that more people are going to realize that these things happened in the 50s and 60s. And they're going to accept the fact. You know how it is when somebody does a movie about something that most people don't like or don't want to talk about. As soon as that movie comes out, bam, everybody's interested. They want to know more. And I think this is what is going to do it for the world. And it's also, if I may say, Tom, it's good for Tom Reed and his family. They can finally put this thing to rest and say, you know what, guys? It's part of history. We accept it, enjoy or don't. It's all up to you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and it speaks for everybody. Yep. And I will say this with the Ancient Aliens thing. They did a pretty good job. I was I've known Mike Barr for a while, and so I'm glad that they sent him out. But there was one mistake in it, and I don't want to focus on the bad part of it, but because they did a great job and they really focused on the citation and the governor. You probably saw the clip.
I did.
But okay, well, there was a lot more said that didn't get picked up, but this ball of light never stopped our car, and I'll tell you why that, for those who saw it, why that happened. We saw this ball of light rise up from the water, which I described, very well with the show, and they did a good job with it. This ball of light was about 4 times the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, and at first it was very self-contained, but there were these rods of light that came out, like 2 rods of light. It was almost like they were almost perfectly round. I mean, they were just these. It almost, and I told them. And it was probably my mistake. I said it reminded me as a kid of an upside down, or like an ice cream cone, right? How it was a big ball of ice cream on top and it had these lights that powered into the water, and it rose up. Well, those lights didn't stay there. They went away, and it was just a ball of light. And they've got this whole thing with the sugar cone looking thing going down the field, which is okay. The point is there. But those rods of light, and I said, I think maybe that light flash, and I was 10. My mother, however, was 29, and my grandmother was, in her 40s, and my brother was with me. So all 4 of us saw this thing, and it was a warm night. It was like 90 degrees for a September night, which is really hot, and so we had the windows open too. So it was a clear night. It was warm. It was still, and we just stopped and we looked at this thing, and it was just mind blowing. I mean, it was bright, and then of course, as it went along this tree line, which is where this corn grows really high now, which is also remarkable in itself. My brother looked off to the right side of the car, out the passenger side, and this waterway kind of circles around, almost like a not an L, but it wraps around. It's almost a horseshoe to some degree. And my brother looked over the right side of the car where this water wrapped around, and sure enough, there was another ball like this, or a severe, or however you want to word it. But this one was orange, like more of an orange. So you had this white, bright ball of light to the left, and you had this orangey ball off to the right. And so we kept going a little further, and my mother got to this telephone pole, which is, because the pole was there back in the day, they worked on the pole. There was a little bit more room to pull off to the right. So she stopped there. And we were looking out the left window, expecting to see this big white ball of light come back, and we didn't see it again. But what we saw in the distance was this huge hovering craft. And to this day, the closest thing that I can, mirror this to or reflect and say that was what we saw was like the top of a turtle shell, not with the whole thing on where the head comes out, but the way it looked, more of almost a tarnished brownish color. And on the bottom of it, sure enough, it had some lights coming out of it. And there were some lights down there that, maybe like a spotlight thing here and there, but you couldn't miss it. So we're like, where's that ball of light, right? Because, okay, what's going on? So you're looking at all 3 moving pieces. You're trying to say, okay, where are we? Then all of a sudden it hit us. We felt like we were underwater. When you hear a tapping underwater, like tick, 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 it echoes, you're kind of, everything's muted, but then the sounds are amplified. That's what it was like. And to be honest with you, as we started to slow down the car, it was like those stones that were hitting the bottom underside of the fender walls as the tires moved, as slow came to a stop. You could hear that really loud. I remember that, like, why is that so loud? And then all of a sudden it was like, it was like this silence, this odd feeling.
I don't know how accurate this. I did a frame grab from the artistic rendering of the. Well, actually, they did a full animation. I just did one frame grab. So how close, when you're in the car, about how far away is this object? It looks like it's certainly within 100 feet when it's over the water.
What are you looking at? What frame, what picture are you looking at?
Looks like the sphere with the light cones coming down over water, and the sedan is off to the left.
Okay, that's the Ancient Aliens clip?
Yep.
Okay, first of all, we were in a station wagon,
Okay.
but not that that matters. But I mean, it kind of matters.
It does matter.
Yeah, well, the reason my grandmother actually saw it first was because I was giving my brother a candy in the back seat, and she turned around to say you can't give it to him, and that because of the windows in the back of the station wagons when she first actually saw this thing. Um, but that rendering, for the most part, is accurate.
Okay.
I would say that's a good, except those rods of light disappeared, but that I would say that's a good shot. I mean, that was pretty frigging on the money. I'd give him that one. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
You said that there was an orange light. Sometimes people report amber colored lights. Was it orange or amber?
I would say it was more. Well, it's kind of hard to say because it was switching colors a little bit. It was almost like It reminded me almost a little bit like, like a dull sun. It had, I've mentioned it as being amber or goldish or orange, but it was quite a ways away, and I was 10 years old. But I would say, to be as honest as I can, I'd say that it kind of moved in color. I think it was just, I I I would say it was like a reddish orange. Is pretty much what I remember for the most part.
And
Um,
what's the reaction in the car? I mean, it's yourself. You're an older brother or a younger brother?
Younger.
Okay, younger brother, and your mom and your grandmom, and
Right.
that's the four of you in the car. Then is that about right?
Yeah.
So
Yep,
what's the general reaction then when you spot this thing?
When we first saw it, we were just like memorized. My mother was still driving, but she's looking out and wants to see what it is. So she's trying to find a spot to pull the car over. But we're only going like 15 miles an hour to begin with,
Sure.
and this light actually passed our car. So the feeling at the time when I think we were sharp before we felt this feeling come over us, which I thought it was electromagnetic anomalies as I look back because the neurons might have been affected, that kind of thing. And there was magnetic anomalies in the area that were read later on. But as we got in between this triangle, if you will, this three-piece, which all were moving together, I think that we were drove into some type of a field is what I think happened because we got all of a sudden we weren't sharp. Me personally, I mean, I remember feeling very out of it and sluggish and I'm looking at this thing. Like I said, we were all looking at the craft over the field, and then all of a sudden the car lit up, which is why Ancient Alien showed the ball of light in front of our car, but our car was already stopped. But the car did, all of a sudden I could see the dashboard. I could see the back of my mother's head. I could see her hair. I could see everything. At the time we had blue interior in the station wagon, and it was just like someone had thrown on a dome light in the place. It's really bright light. And then bang, there was this eruption of crickets and katydids and bang, that was the last thing I remember being in the car. And then we all remember, being in some type of like an industrial area, if you will. And I've mentioned an airplane hangar because, again, that is how the best way for me to paint a picture to someone would be like an empty airplane hangar. But I do remember that there were tubes of light where the wall met the ceiling. It was almost, if I were to try to describe that light, it would be like a single fluorescent tube. Maybe, and then a space and a tube and a space and a tube and a space and a tube. And I remember off to the right when I first kind of came to, and I use that word because I don't remember getting there. The first thing I remember is like sliding off some type of a cart or table, and off to the right were like these, what looked like silver tables that I referenced being in school. That they used to put the slide projector on or something.
Right.
And it was really kind of quick to me, but I remember just being grabbed really hard on my left arm and being taken out a door and into another area. And I remember, this piece coming down from the ceiling and this table I was sitting on rising. And I remember seeing what looked like an ant to some degree. And I remember running. I ran out this corner of this room and I got into this big open area where there was like markings on the floor. I was like being in an empty Walmart. And so I've told people there was no way that this was that craft because where I was just too big. It was way too big. And so to speed, jump forward a little bit, when we came to in the car, we all came out of this thing at different times. It wasn't like bang, it was all instantly like we're all, having this conversation again and like, oh, we will, did we lose 3 hours? It wasn't like that. It was my grandmother was the first one to come to. Now, here's the kicker, and this is what gets confusing for me. And not a lot of it isn't, but I'm just saying what really has me asking, the obvious questions. My mother had the car running. We had stopped. We never turned the car off. The headlights were still on the car when we were looking at this thing. When my grandmother was now in the driver's seat, and no one knows how my mother and grandmother seemed to get reversed in the car, the ignition was off. And so she had to actually start the car. My mother was not responding. My brother's head was on my right knee. He wasn't even moving. I was out of it apparently. So she goes down the road just enough to turn around and starts heading back to town, because after we had left our diner, my grandmother used to smoke Tarringtons, and she went to the store next door, which was Silk's, which is still there today, by the way. Ran into Silk's for help. But she didn't really know help for what. Nobody was responding. I need some help. But she was also and not herself. I mean, I've mentioned that she was walking kind of aimlessly. She was kind of still groggy or out of it. And so when she got out of the car, I think it was the slamming of the door that woke me, because I was still behind the driver's seat. And that's the side that she got out. So I'm assuming maybe that woke me. And so when I started to come to, I saw her walking into Silk's store. And so I got out. No one in the car was responding. So I got out. I'm kind of out of it still. And she walks into Silk's, and she goes right by the clerk, which obviously she went in to see the clerk. And she goes to the back of the store, and she gets all tied up in these carriages and strollers and bicycles. And I'm trying to grab her arm saying, come on, Anna, we gotta go. And she's just kind of out of it. And then she breaks down and she starts kind of shivering and crying. And so the guy from Silk's store came over to her, and he's like, what's going on? Are you okay? And she kind of walks outside, and my mother's like walking around in front of the car now. So she's up. And I think at that point, she just didn't know what to say and got in the car and drove us home. And it was the next day that came over the radio station about the craft with all the witnesses first thing in the morning. And so now we're like, okay, so this is what happened last night, guys. And that created some issues. And then, Eddie Galata's father, who was a chief of police, had to come in because people were having, obviously strong opinions about a lot of that. And again, that's another way that there were not police reports, I wouldn't say, but police statements that, carried through later on, and why this seems to have such an historic paper trail locally had a strong.
I have a question. A lot of these cases regarding insectoid-like creatures that are reported by abductees, contactees, or experiencers, they have described these creatures from the neck up as humanoid and praying mantis the rest of the way down. What would you describe these creatures like regarding these insect-like creatures? What did they look like to you?
Well, I have pictures of them, I think, on the site too. But to me, it looked like an ant. I mean, it had a head about the size of a football. Mm-hmm. And, and everybody saw it in my family. It wasn't like it was just me. And the legs of it were almost like bamboo. I remember being in Florida, where I lived for a very long time, that when I saw bamboo, it reminded me of the limbs and legs. And the body was more like almost like somewhat like a fatter teardrop. And, it had, the head of it was like a brownish or light, had like a yellow look, almost like a yellow or reddish yellow. The closest thing I can find to it is like a fire ant head. And so when my brother and I and my mother and grandmother at the time, we drew this thing as a kid, and we all looked at it, and that sketch I've had forever. And then about 10 years ago, I hired an illustrator to put it together, and I think it's on the website now. But it doesn't really look a whole lot like what other people describe. It doesn't look like this praying mantis type. It was very different, There was two of them too. We didn't just see one, and it was about 4 feet tall, and it seemed to higher and lower itself, just by its stance. It would just raise and lower, and I turned its head. I don't know if it was robotic. I don't know if it was alive. I don't know I don't know what. I don't. It was very cold to me, and I saw it from about 6 or 7 feet away, and that's the one thing that has been difficult for me to make sense of, or what it was. I mean, the thing is too, I was 10 years old and I was extremely frightened at that point, because this calming feeling that we had didn't hold true afterwards. I mean, when I was in this hangar type thing, or wherever I was, this hallway, which was very tall walls, very narrow, I was pretty sharp then. I remember this vividly, and I was scared. I ran, and so when I saw this thing, clear, conscious mind. I mean, this was nothing that I was, this wasn't a hypnosis thing. This wasn't, in some weird state. I mean, I was as clear-headed as I'm talking to you right now on the phone.
And
So
the rest of the family basically is confirming everything you said, or did you not talk about it, or how did that all?
no, our whole family, we've been talking about this our whole lives. I mean, we didn't talk about it when my father was running for office. We had to move out of state, but that's not something you want your opposing candidate to pick up on. But we all saw pretty much the same thing. The best way to describe this is that there was four of us, and it's kind of like let's say you're in the mall, and one of you is in the food court, someone else is in Sears, which is no longer in business, or J.C. Penney, or what have you, the Apple Store, whatever. And all of a sudden, let's say hypothetically, a bomb goes off in the mall. Well, you all see what happens, but you all see it from a different perspective.
Right.
And that's kind of what this was. Like, I heard my mother's voices. I heard her yelling for me. I don't remember seeing my brother next to me, but there are times Matthew says that he remembers seeing me for a second, and my grandmother remembers, my late grandmother remembered a lot of this too, and so we all remembered this thing from a different perspective, and that's kind of over the years how we put it together. We spent a lot of time sitting around a dinner table, and my father was a lawyer, so he was always looking for, okay, did you say this? Did you say that? I mean, he was analytical. Jot it down, write this down, keep records, and we did, because he was all about a paper trail. Lock this up. When the time is right, we're going to write about it. And when he mentioned it in 2006, he was gone within 2 months. So,
right.
But my father had a voice, right? My father, if he wanted to, get in touch with the Hartford Courant, he picked up the phone. It wasn't like someone who has a modeling agency in Florida and wants to make, expects a fair coverage by the Hartford Courant 1,000 miles away. But my dad, bang, if he picked up the phone, they listened. And I think that intimidated people. Plus, if you saw the records that he brought back from the United Nations, and I've got them in a briefcase. Matter of fact, it's on I'm talking to you in my bedroom right now, and I have them. Matter of fact, my hand was just on them. And I've got.
That's it. That's a scene in the movie too, right?
Yeah, well, part of it, yeah.
Okay, wait, Tom, before you get into that, I have about 20 or 30 questions to ask you. Okay, so I'm just going to fire them off. If you want to say yes or no or elaborate, that's fine. My questions regarding what occurred to you are occasionally humanoids are spotted inside these craft or outside of the craft. Were there humans or humanoids or other creatures other than the kind that you witnessed?
Well, I would say yes. There were when I do remember that when I was grabbed by my arm, I would say that who the person or individual or entity that grabbed me, I would say if I had to label it, that it was more like a humanoid. It was shorter. I was small. I was 10. This was not a towering person over me, a very strong person. And let's say, it looks bald, maybe a little Oriental, if I were to say, or Asian. It did not resemble. It looked human, but off human.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that it looked like a gray. No.
Okay, and then you said the other creatures were about 4 feet tall. How tall was this one that you're describing now?
that grabbed me, probably 5 feet. Now, what I said about the other ones, I didn't say it was 4. I said it would raise and lower itself. And at times, my brother saw it, it lowered to his level. When I saw it, it raised. So I would say that it could have raised when at standing full, full, from, extended fully, I would say maybe even 6 or 7 feet.
I thought you said that the insect-like creatures appeared to be about 4 feet tall to you. Is that correct?
When they squatted, yes. When they raised themselves, no.
Okay, so if they were just standing on the ground in front of you, how tall do you suspect they could have been?
At least 6 feet.
At least 6 feet tall. So that means the craft was pretty tall on the inside. Do you think?
Oh, the craft on the inside? Are you kidding me? The craft was probably 8. I didn't say that. Now, I'm not saying I was in a craft. See, This is the part. I was not in a craft at this point. I don't believe I was ever in that craft. I've never, ever said that. Yeah, I said I was in a hangar that was much bigger than the craft, this had an amazing tall ceilings.
When you say you were in a hangar, what is a hangar? What is a definition of a hangar to you, so our listeners understand what that means?
Like an airplane hangar.
Okay, and so
a big room, basically.
Yeah,
like a hangar-sized room. Okay.
Okay, and so see, this is I think where some of the confusion lies for some of these folks that are listening to this.
Yeah, sure.
And that is, you describe a hangar, and rightfully so, because that's where you were. But and that makes sense. But and then you describe the craft, which you might describe a little bit more later. It's up to you. But then you say you have missing time also. Do you feel that at any point you were actually possibly in the craft?
Yeah. To be honest with you, I don't know. I don't remember. I would say that, is it possible? Sure.
Okay. And then you said you said you had missing time. How long do you think that missing time might have?
We know it was 3 hours.
Okay. And then also regarding the creatures, you said one may have been up to 6 feet tall, and then the humanoid or the other creature you described, how tall was that? I didn't quite catch that.
Probably like 5 feet.
5 feet. Was it stout looking, or was it very fragile?
It was more frail. But it was but whoever grabbed me whatever grabbed me was very strong. It hurt my arm.
I see. And so you would say there were about 2 different creatures in front of you, or were there multiple ones, more than 2?
Well, I would say that all in all, I probably saw about 6.
6 different types of creatures, or
no, 2. And 2. I wouldn't call the other ones creatures. I would call them more like a hybrid. They look more human to me than anything, but okay. Frail humans that were a little bit smaller, that had a super tall, strong grip on my arm.
So just to be clear, you're saying 6 individuals of 2 different types. Is that about right? Am I
correct? That's
okay,
right, Frank.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I got it. All right.
Would you say that it was 3 of each type? So.
No, it was two of the insect and about 4 of the others.
Okay.
And actually, they had placed something on my body that I don't talk about much either, which looked like large raisin packs.
Yes, and I do want to go into that, but forgive me for being so simple-minded here, but I really need it re-explained to me again.
Okay. No, go ahead, fire away. I'm here for you.
I will.
I will. Yes.
I have the creatures again. Let's paint this again. So we have the insect creatures, then we have the sort of I guess you call them hybrid creatures. So 2 different kinds of creatures. Then we have a total of 6 of them. So with the insect creature, how many of those were there, and how many were there of the hybrid? That's the part I'm not getting.
Okay, because I mentioned that a minute ago. 2 of the insects, and probably 4 of the humanoid.
Got it. Okay, so then I was going to ask you, the eyes, the skin, and the smell of the hybrid creatures, could you actually see their skin, look at their eyes, smell them, or were they talking to you? Can you please give us a little bit of background on that?
Well, again, to be quite honest with you, I'd say they appeared almost 90% human. They weren't that different. Nothing stunk. I did hear a tapping sound in the craft or the broom or wherever I was. but there was no and no cologne. But yeah, it was no different than standing next to maybe a 20-year-old person or Asian. It's just that they were bald and frail, much thinner. I remember maybe in white outfits, if you will, not like dress, but like almost like a all in one.
Yeah, like a boiler suit, basically.
Yeah, and there was another thing. I remember there was a curtain in there that looked like almost like a half, like a clear, semi-clear shower curtain that I remember seeing some movement behind that. One of the walls in there was all made of glass. It looked like glass, I should say. I don't know for sure. And it bowed inward, almost like a if you were looking at a big coffee can, in a way, it's bowing inward, just in pretty much that shape, with two pockets or exits on each side. There were 3 hallways that joined this large room that I was in, where what the humanoids were off of or standing off of. And one off to the left, there was an entrance that was about as wide as a 4-lane highway. And then straight ahead to me, to the right, was a hallway that entered that was much more narrow. And the one that was just to the right of me, so it almost looked like a Y, with the bottom part of the Y being twice as big as the halls that might have entered it. And this room was kind of round. And I've looked back and thought to myself, well, maybe that was meant to handle a large flow of traffic. If you had a lot of people coming in that had to go in different directions, they would have had to been able to walk around each other. That's kind of what I've looked back and said to myself, well, what else could that have possibly have been?
Okay,
yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the hybrid again. Did it have a mouth at all?
Yeah, these would look like people.
Okay,
it was 90% human. I mean, the only reason I say wasn't human because it was smaller, more frail, and it was definitely bald, and just a little off human. You know what I mean? It wasn't like it was. It's not. Something was off with it. Yeah.
So basically, if you saw this particular an individual that looked sort of like this on the street and they were dressed in normal street clothes, you might do a double take. But
you definitely do a double take.
You do a double take. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, hold on.
I think what we're finding out here, Tom, is that when you make your movie, you're going to need a lot of visual support to help clear things up.
It's going to be hard. Yeah.
There's been a lot of reports of Asian type aliens. I just also want to.
Is there really?
Yes, there has been.
Yeah, I've seen. Yeah, there are. They're like Eurasian types, not the grays, humanoids. Yeah, there's a little bit of that out there.
That's kind of what I said earlier. Like, that's kind of what it was. So do I say, were they, hybrid Asians? Where this is where I don't like to label stuff, but I'm glad you mentioned that because I did not know that.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, it's out there. Yeah, there's a little bit of it here and there.
Stop. Wait. Let me ask you a question. I have a bunch more questions to ask. And that is, did it have like 5 fingers, 4 fingers? How many fingers did the hybrid
look like a person. Yeah.
Okay. And then also, I wanted to ask you about this.
Yeah, let me jump in here. How about the ant people? What kind of hands do they have?
Yes.
You know what? I remember that. Believe it or not, because this is going to sound crazy, but they were facing a wall. Their heads were like, I'm going to say 4 or 5 inches from a wall, and it was off to me. So I've always said, were they looking at something in the wall? Was there something I couldn't see from the angle? But they reached up and touched something, and it looked like human hands to me, and I'll never forget that. And I remember that, and that freaked me out because this is where I say to myself, was it something that was just genetically engineered, And I said, okay, well, humans have this ability, and, ants can go, so long without water. Did they genetically engineer this thing? But yes, it had hands like a person.
Great. Okay. And then I had another question. And yes, there are, by the way, plenty of reports, probably in the thousands around the world regarding the kind of creature you just described. And then also wanted to ask you, did they implant you with anything? If they did you have any scoop marks or anything to indicate maybe the location of that implant, or was there a buzzing feeling from it? Did you have any material taken from you, anything like that?
All I can tell is I've got 2 marks that people say are scoop marks. I've got one on my right wrist and one on my left wrist. And I've had them forever, and I don't know where they came from, and they never go away.
Did the creatures talk to you openly like we do, or did they telepathically communicate with you?
Now, here's an interesting, I'm glad you asked that, because I knew they could understand me, but
Right.
I could not understand them.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, and then I have kind of a strange question. You might find yourself having to be redundant here. But I wanted to ask you about that hangar, because I have, I'm trying to visualize it like you explained it really well. I mean, beautifully. But the part that I'm missing might be a pretty big part, and that is, where in the hell did this hangar come from? That's the part I'm missing. Like, can you just backtrack on that? And, you know, because I know you explained it perfectly, because you gave.
No, I got the question. And the answer is, I don't know.
Okay.
I can say this, though.
Yeah.
I think Kevin might know.
Okay.
What's that, Tom?
Well, we've talked about this area that I believe I was taken to, and I think everyone in the area, Sheffield, Great Barrington, in the Berkshires, that is very familiar with this case, all believe that I was taken to an abandoned military base. And Kevin knows where there's one in the area that's roped off. It's not far from where this happened, probably 3 miles, and I believe it's underwater. Is that correct?
Yes, it's part of. I don't know if a lot of you understand, but there was back in World War II, when they made the atomic bomb, what ignites the atomic bomb was made by a thing called lime and nugget, and they made it here in the Falls Village, Kent area. There's still a lot of places around here where they still mine lime rock, and one of the places around here, I think it's on. I'm thinking of the name of the road, in Sand Hill Road or Sand Road. It's still there, and it's roped off, and there's signs on it saying, "Do not enter government property." And one time I was following the track going down along where they have this like kind of a historical park, which talks about the trains and the things that are made by the forges in this area. And when you go down towards the end, it's very swampy, and there's really no place you can walk to. And one day I walked in a path all the way to the end, and there's this huge pond off from where the Great Falls are and where the water comes down in the area. And there's signs over there, and they're saying, "Do not cross government property." And you're looking like, how in God's name am I going to be able to cross this swamp without sinking into the mud? It's a horrible place. It's very wide, very mucky.
And it's not far from the monument.
It isn't very far from the monument. That's correct. It isn't. And so I went there, and one day I saw a black SUV over in the area by the water on a kind of a hilly, kind of a rocky kind of plateau with grass and stuff. And I looked up, and all the men were wearing just basically like jumpsuits, black jumpsuits, and you couldn't call out to them because they were too far. But I wanted to know where they were going. And this one particular time, this truck came out, and you could see it go down a little path, and it makes a left, and it just disappeared there. Now, I finally found a way around there. It's through the swamps, and there's a mucky trail you sink to about up to your ankles. And I went over there, and I looked, and I couldn't find a track or a door or a cave or anything over there. And
it's underground.
Signs over there. And nobody knows. We think it's underground because there's a marker there that says that there was an old train trestle there back in the 1850s or something. And
I read something that there was a mild plutonium spill or something, and they didn't know how to clean it up. So they had to abandon it, but they didn't know how to treat it back then. So the government keeps going back and back and back to try to find a way to make sure that it's contained because it's under the water. And what Kevin had said is there's a falls there. There's a big, that's the Falls Village Falls. And so if this is where I went, which would make the most sense because it was only I could be there from the monument in 5 minutes, and it was connected to, or at least said to be connected to, the mining in the area, and where they were playing with the whole nuclear or had nuclear interest in back in the day in the 40s, and I think it was still open in the 60s.
And to make a point there, I went down to a museum in Kent where it's called a agricultural mining museum. It's very unique off of Route 44 north of Kent, Connecticut. And I went in there and I was looking through the museum about blasting lime rock and stuff one day. And I walked in and they had the only display I have ever seen in my eyes or anywhere in the world that showed an actual nugget of lime rock that was used for the atomic bomb with a display about it. And they were talking about what they had, like various lime rock and like supply depots in this area, and that would account for why these places are still under government contract and not open. You can't go down there. There's guards down if you go down, try to go past it. So that raised some suspicions to me, made me want to research this. And what Tom's telling you, there's that every possibility that this could have been something that the government had been doing, because the documents show that they were trying to cover it, the sightings by people, which, if you think about it, all could line up to this kind of thing. And there is a book out about mining lime rock out that someone produced back in the 60s. It talks about the base with pictures where they made these nuggets, lime rock nuggets for the atomic bomb. It's the igniter, which causes.
Yeah, they were sent to Oak Ridge, where Stanton Friedman
right.
worked.
And they were made right here in Falls Woods, Connecticut. Most people don't know that even happened around here.
And oddly enough, I live 12 miles from Oak Ridge.
That's right.
Yeah, of all things.
Tom, you said that there may have been, just correct me if I'm wrong, please. Do you feel like there may have been telepathic communication with these folks?
Well, yeah. I go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I'd love for you to answer that, please.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, something that, first of all, I totally 100% know that's true. And I'll tell you why. My son, and I don't talk about it much anymore. Like I said, I try to keep to what happened in '69. But my son was my son and I were with Travis about, 8 years ago. We were in Cincinnati or something. And there was someone that was playing around with, the ESP cards, the circles, the squares, all that kind of testing.
Xeno cards.
Yeah, Xenocard, whatever. Yep. And I told him, I said, my son was tested back when he was a kid at the Miami Children's Hospital, and he had scored higher than coincidental chance with this type of thing. He's always been super sensitive. He, ever since he was a baby. I mean, he first of all, he has these large membrane of like blood that almost looks like a long worm of membrane that comes out of his nose. So we had him x-rayed, and they don't know where this hole is in his sinus. And so, of course, we, started having him checked and tested. And next thing I know, he's in the gifted program at Crystal McAuliffe Middle School in Florida. And then he beat an unbeaten chess pro when he was in 5th grade. And he was just so advanced and so sensitive to things that, I said, let's get him tested, and so we did. And so when we had moved out of Florida, I ran into Travis in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and we decided to, hit the road, and we were just had him tested, and Travis was there. And sure enough, he hit these cards like, I think a couple of times. People are gonna think I'm exaggerating, but I think he hit almost, hit the numbers like twice in a row or something at one point, and you're like, my God, that's like crazy. You had a 1 in 5 chance, right? And so I took him back to the Knoxville Hypnosis Center right here in town, and had him tested. And sure enough, I've got a document from the testing facility. It's a renowned testing facility. It's a major hospital, where they said that he actually tested to show signs of ESP, and he tested once again higher than coincidental chance. So I asked myself, with what happened, I think you alluded to was something taken from me, scan, or with the scoop mark thing. Well, maybe something was also interchanged. Maybe something was also not just extracted, but given to our family gene or line. Because if you know my son, and actually Kevin met him just the other day. He's extremely advanced. Like he was at his girlfriend's house, 2 years ago, and about 45 minutes away, and he calls me up in a panic and says, Dad, are you okay? You okay? And I assure him I am. It's fine. I don't live in a area I really got to worry about it. And he says, check the doors. He was in a panic. And so I said, okay, I will. So I got out of bed. It was probably like 11:30. Checked the doors, windows, walked outside, nothing. Um, sure enough, about 45 minutes later, Chris runs in the house and goes, oh my God, Dad, you could have come out here and see this. Went outside, and sure enough, there was an SUV flipped upside down on the side of my property. And there was a man hanging out the sunroof. Another time, when my dad was alive, yeah.
I have a question for you. Can we just go back to the event, because I have a ton more questions for you. I wanted to ask you.
Well, I think this ties into.
I'll just take a nap, guys. That's fine.
I still have the part two to that question. Did they put pictures in your head? Any of these creatures at all?
No, I don't remember. That was 10. No.
Okay.
Hey, I want to jump in with a couple of quick questions myself here.
Yeah.
Before we get the chance, 24 or more.
Yeah.
What I want to ask about, did any of the other witnesses in the area recount anything along the lines of a closer contact experience similar to yours?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, and then I had
one more. When you were in the room, the very large room, did it feel like the sort of architecture or design that you would see in something on Earth, or did it look otherworldly? Did that feel otherworldly to you as well? Whether did you see a lot of right angles, that kind of thing?
In
the hangar.
1969 in the hangar, no. It looked very industrial by design.
Okay.
It was simple, nothing super high tech, except the room I was in with that boat inward. That I still to this day have never seen anything like that. Okay. And by the way, the table that I was on, I've mentioned this a few times, and it's actually in a couple of films. It reminded me today, looking back, as an autopsy table. It had the center pole in the middle. It rose up, but this thing that came down was like a two-part cage, and the first part went over my body, and the second one like caught up with it. And then there were these holes in the sides that kind of lined up, and that's where they stuck these big packs that looked like raisins.
Did you have nightmares after the event? How were you affected by it?
Yeah, I would say I did. There were, I think, mild panic attacks for a while and stuff. But at the same time, it was just a matter of getting used or accustomed to the fact that, that nobody was hurt, and I've said to people, just because someone scares you or knocks on the window while you're watching a horror flick and you jump, just because you are scared or you're frightened doesn't mean there's a reason to be. And I think it was just a matter that, the fact that something had happened that our body or our feelings or our senses weren't accustomed to, we just needed to acclimate ourselves. And I think because I was so young at the time, I kind of adjusted pretty quickly. And but then again, I couldn't really talk openly about it, and that made it difficult.
You mentioned how, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned how there may have been some kind of effect, not just on yourself, but to other members of your family not connected directly to the event, like your son. Do you feel that these ETs or ETs of any kind may have been involved in your family in a generational manner?
Oh, no question.
And when you say no question, why?
Well, because my son's affected, my mother was affected, my grandmother. So there's 4 generations right there.
Okay,
and then back in the day when my mother had her first sighting, believe it or not, was in 1954.
And I don't mean like, after the event. I mean before it ever happened in a generation manner. Do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, my mother had and one of the reasons that I think that she was so understanding with us was that she was the first one to see something back in the day or experience.
Now, Tom, real quick, did you know at the time that this all happened that your mom had this incident, or did this come about afterwards as you're trying to get a grip on it?
Afterwards.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And regarding that incident, which happened to your mother, did she share with you that the event that occurred September 1st, 1969 may have matched her experience that occurred prior to that?
It didn't. It wasn't anything like it.
Okay. So would you say that they were different creatures? Is that what she relayed to you, or just different everything?
My mother was going to a college with her Uncle Bob, or my Uncle Bob, and her brother, and Bob's girlfriend at the time who went by Kip. My grandmother also was there. They stayed at a cabin in Moosehead Lake, Maine, and my mother and Kip both woke up at the middle of the night having the same experience in different rooms where they felt that their torsos were being shifted to the left and shifted to the right. And my mother felt like she was frozen, almost like some people would say, almost like a, paralysis or something, but yet she could still see, hear, her body was being moved. And then she woke up, and my grandmother was actually in the kitchen making pancakes. And my mother walked in very placid, and my grandmother knew that she was in need of some help and tried to talk to her, and she was trying to just tell her what happened. And then Kip walked in, and she was in the same condition as my mother. And so after being attended to, and my mother and Kip just said they would not sleep in that house again, or that cabin that was rented, and they went down on a boating dock and they tried to sleep outside, and they ended up being back on the porch because it was cold. And then eventually Bob and my grandmother talked them to come back in the house, and then the next day they left.
Okay, then I had another question. Were there any traces, stains, or evidence on your body or anyone's body, pain, cuts or bruises, or get sick, anything regarding that?
Yes.
And go ahead.
My brother had 2 puncture wounds in his chest and 2 more behind his right ear. I did not. He that almost looked like 2 sugar cone wounds that were healed immediately, and they were also looked at by our family doctor, who also went on record, by the way. Gave testimony, but he had cancer and he decided to open up about it, and he filmed with Laura Wagner for a film because he wanted to, just be up front with it. He's been our doctor for a long time. And so his report said that the 2 wounds in his chest were basically over the thymus gland. And of course, the thymus gland produces the T cells, which have the body, or build the body's immune system. And the other 2 wounds behind his right ear is connected directly to a tube from the brain that drives the amount of T cells that your body produces to fight, virus or bacteria. So basically, the 2 wounds were connected to the body's ability to build and manufacture antibodies to fight off, viruses, basically. And it builds the body's immune system. So there was a connection to that with my brother. And that's medical record. I mean, that's common. Anybody can get his records. It's on there.
Okay, and you mentioned how folks were not in the same position in the vehicle when they left. What I wanted to ask you was clothing in a different place on people's bodies. In other words, a lot of abductees, contactees, experiencers will say, I went in one way, with my shirt on and my pants on a certain way, and I left looking different. My shirt was on inside out, my pants were on backwards, that kind of thing. Did that occur?
No.
Okay. And then also wanted to ask you, were there any unusual smells or sounds before, during, or after the event?
A tapping sound. And the reason I know that tapping sound, I actually had an MRI a long time ago after my car wreck. And that same tapping sound freaked me out because it was so similar to what we heard. So the tapping sound of an MRI machine really mimics what I remember hearing.
And when you say the tapping sound, was that while you were lying on that table that you were talking about, or where were you when that occurred, when you heard that sound?
It was all over. It was in the hangar. It was in the hallway. It was pretty much everywhere. It was just like da 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 like that.
That's fascinating. And then also wanted to know, how long did it feel, not necessarily factually how long you were gone, but how long did it feel to you that you were gone?
10 seconds.
Really?
But I remember more than 10 seconds. But when I came to in the car, I didn't know if 5 minutes had passed or what, not 3 hours, because it had just gotten dusk when we left. The lights were just gone on in the car, and my mother was trying to get us home, by 8:30 to get us cleaned up and in bed by 9. So it was right around 8 o'clock, and when we went back to Silks, they were just closing at 11. So It was 3 hours, and it didn't feel like anything,
Oh, okay. And then thank you for being patient with me, because I know I'm being real aggressive about these questions.
I'm glad you're asking them. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you why I'm doing it. First of all, that's my personality. And then the second reason is I believe you. I want to tell you right now, I have never doubted you. I think that your case is 100% genuine, and I believe everything you're saying. And I know that sounds biased. I'm not going to spend time, telling the listeners, because I don't want to waste time here, because what you say is more important, I believe. But I just wanted to say, when I heard you talk about this, because I've listened to you talk on other podcasts and stuff, I did a little bit of homework before we did this show. The manner in which you compose yourself, it really doesn't matter how politely or rude I ask my questions. Your demeanor's the same. Also,
and Chant's specialty is rudeness. So
yeah,
I think she's great.
I also want to say that you don't really care whether people believe you or not. And Travis Walton, he's the same way. He does not give a damn whether people believe him or not. And you're exactly, you both are identical in that respect. Really, and it's funny because I don't think people understand the kind of hell and back you've been through regarding this situation. So when I was telling everybody earlier, okay, guys, stop, is because I wanted to get into the meat of what happened, so to speak, because I know our listeners are just dying to hear what you have to say. And when when I fire off these questions and you are not even perturbed in any way, shape, or form by them, it really is such a wonderful testament. I'd like to let everybody know right there. That should be really telling to everyone, and that you don't.
Yeah, because I think that over the years, and certainly if you look back at the shows that have been done,
right,
and some shows showing a ball of light, some shows showing the craft, they show a craft going over a car, then they show a ball of light stopping it. I mean, if I was your listeners, I'd be like, well, that's not what I saw on Discovery Channel. That's not what I saw on Uncovering Aliens. That's not what I saw on, Destination America. That's not what I saw on PBS. That's not what I saw. It's like, it's so confusing in a lot of ways. And
there's some folks who jump to the conclusion that your story is changing when that's not the case.
It's not the case. No, I have not seen that. I'm sorry to speak on his behalf. I have to tell everybody, I've listened to him a lot before this show. The story has not changed. I will even purposely be rude to somebody just to get an emotion out of them, to see if if that will create a different story effect, so to speak. And no, Tom has remained steadfast in his story. But I do want to get back to the questions, guys. I'm going to stop, but I do have 2 or 3 questions left.
Go ahead.
Okay, good. Let me just look at my list here. Just 1 second here. Okay, you said that everybody woke up a little bit different times. People were in different positions in the vehicle. But did witnesses to you, not to the event, but witnesses to you, did they see you acting differently after the event, or were you so introverted about it nobody could tell the difference?
Oh, I wasn't introverted about it at all. Matter of fact, because we had the diner, and I guess, picture it this way: if you got a hair salon and your people, you have customers and you cut their hair all the time, they say they say your stylist knows more about you than your own family, right? Because you chat, you talk. So in a diner, when my friends were there and my mother's friends were there, and the help we had, the cook, the waitresses, it was like a family. Remember, this was a small community, and it wasn't like we didn't know each other's families, babysit for each other, hang out at our house, drive our snowmobiles, whatever. So it was a little bit different community. It was very Norman Rockwell. It just turned Norman Rockwell paintings more into a Salvador Dali. It just kind of flipped everything. But at the same time, we shared our information all the time in that diner. And I think that's, to paint a picture, I'm having, my waffle. and you come in and you are so-and-so's mother, and you go, hey, Tom, how's it going? Jimmy's going to be walking to school with you today. Okay. And by the way, don't worry about it. We're all got your back and all that. And then you start talking to their daughter or son, and then some jerk comes in behind you, and now you're sticking up for us because you're friends with us. And so then these questions come up. Did you tell that person that, or what did you say? So you're always talking about what was said, who said what to who, and why would he say that? Oh, he's a jerk. He's just, because people exaggerate. And so the talk, to be honest with you, there was no being introverted. I mean, it was just always there. It was just like living in a hair salon. I mean, everyone, oh, so-and-so said, it was like a gossip center, right? If anything. But at the same time, there was a time when I think my mother said, enough, enough of this already. But it wasn't like it was an introverted thing. It was just like, it was just best for the family, because a lot, the sales started to drop a little bit there too. I mean, it was, you know what I mean? I mean, some people got offended when someone else, you go to a place you've eaten all your life, and then some guy you barely know tells you to go, hey, do you want that to eat here, or do you want that to go? Because if you're going to have it here, you're going to behave yourself, you're going to apologize to the lady, or get the hell out. And he's like, now he doesn't feel welcome there anymore. And he really isn't. And my mother had this table of people that would come in. She always called it the table of four. These four people would always come in, and it was mostly this group. One guy would stand out in front of a restaurant door, say, oh, they're closed, when they're obviously open. And, he would just be obnoxious and walk in and be loud, and then his friends would come in and take over a table, and they'd come in with manure on their shoes or smell like, from farmland, and not, because they stepped in manure. Their trucks would come in, they had poop on their freaking tires of their trucks, and you're trying to have an orange juice, right? You're sitting here, you just paid $1 for this frigging Tropicana orange juice, and you can't even drink it. So now the guy who's having the orange juice gets up and leaves, and he's not going to pay the bill because this is ridiculous. Nancy would go, just go. I got it. I understand. So this guy not only cleared out the restaurant, but the people eating had to leave. And so that hurt. And so some of her friends would say, okay, enough.
So Tom, just to jump in here, this your more intense event than most of the witnesses. I'm assuming the whole town pretty much knows. A lot of people saw something. But your story about having the more intense encounter, the close encounter, is already out. The folks know about this, that you experienced something a little bit further than a lot of the general witnesses.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of kids in school who drawn what they saw, and it hung. They taped them to the chalkboard where the chalk would go, the little lip underneath the chalkboard. And these kids, a lot of them sketched what they saw. And that was interesting, too, because when I went into my first year of fourth grade, I was going to ask you about that. The school year's got to be starting, maybe a few days after this all happened? Yeah, first day of school had just about started, and I went, and other kids were drawing what they saw. And so I remember standing in my door one day, and I walked into this classroom, and I saw that it said "Green Men from Mars." And I'll never forget it. And it was the first drawing as I walked in the door, and I would not go in the classroom. I actually stood there because it resonated. It hit, it was like a punch in the stomach. I was like, really? And so the teacher comes over to me, a woman, and says, Tommy, you need to take your seat. And I stood there and I wouldn't enter the room. And she says, oh, you're so-and-so. She connected me with the diner. And all of a sudden she was so much sweeter to me. And, she walked me in and sat there. But that was a time where I wasn't myself. I remember being afraid to walk in my own classroom because of the images on the chalkboard. And so I drew mine eventually and stuck it up there. And of course, it was much different. It had the craft and the willow tree and the water. So that didn't sit well. Yeah.
We do have a listener who has a couple questions, and they've been very patient with me. They want to remain anonymous, but they wanted to ask you two totally different questions. Okay. And one is, did you ever have regressive hypnosis? And the other question is, they understand that you may have grown up with religion. how did you reconcile your situation that occurred to you with the religion that you grew up with? So those two different questions. If you want me to repeat them, I'll be happy to.
No, I got it.
And
Sure, easy. Okay, so by the way, Anonymous, very good questions, and I'm glad you asked them. My mother has her master's in ministry. My mother is very religious in a lot of ways. She's not your typical Bible thumper or anything, but she does, believe she's going to see her husband when she passes. And although she has her master's in ministry, she doesn't, she questions a lot of of what used to be a very strong belief for her. I was an altar boy. I used to carry the cross back in Sheffield, Massachusetts, in the church where my mother and father actually got married. And I think when this happened, I refused to go to church. I found it, for some reason, and I don't know why, I knew, and I will say knew, even though that's a strong word, that a lot of that, in my eyes, was a farce. I'm not suggesting it's all, nonsense, but I'm just saying what we were being told at a young age. I felt like I knew so much more, than I questioned everything. I mean, 9 people in our family are Rh negative. I'm O negative bloodline. If we all were spawned from Adam and Eve, we'd all have the same blood type. So, I mean, there's obviously something going on here that's not being picked up by the church. But anyway, so I know what I saw in a lot of ways. I know I used to sit on top of the stable that we had on Boardman Street where the horses were, and I just used to look out over the town and the mountains and look at the sky and say to myself, I don't belong here. There's more. I wasn't meant to be here. There's so much more out there. And it certainly didn't tie into religion. And I was just like, we are from, I believe that, I found I felt an inner knowledge. I've always had that. I wasn't into throwing the frisbee around. I wasn't into the girls, with the hula hoops or going out to kick the ball. I was like always now thinking, forward thinking, and it changed my life, and so I wouldn't go back to church. I think I've been to church 2 or 3 times since the 70s, and I go once in a while with my mother on Christmas or something like that. But it completely changed my views. I believe, actually, just to take this a step further, that because of the way our planet has this odd axis, or the way it rotates, it can make all kinds of life can thrive here because of the amount of the array of weather, polar bears are, in Siberia or what have you, and giraffes are here where they need to be, and everything seems to have thrived in the area that it needs to. And of course, we're here. We have different blood types, and which never last without. You've heard this before, but at the same time, to me, Earth is just an arc itself. And I've thought that since I was young after this. So you asked me earlier if there was like a telepathic type of thing. I don't remember something that specific of like a thought or something being relayed to me, or I just know after the incident that I felt so much more awake. And I saw things differently. My mind was more open. And I said, we're not from here. I'm talking when I was 10. We weren't meant to be here. Everything's come in pairs, and almost like the ark, because I related it to my time in church, where people say, "Oh yeah, the chicken or the egg, what came first?" And there's all these questions. And I'm going, no. If there was two, a male and a female of this species, then they would have all been inbred. There would have had to been groups, and there would have had to been where they could survive and not be, eaten by another predator. So they had to be safe over here, and the lions needed to be over here, and the giraffes needed to be where they could, be safe and thrive and grow. And then eventually, this planet would all come together. And so to me, that's what I believe. I believe we're Martians, for lack of a better word. We weren't born here. We weren't from here. And this all hit me at 10. And so to answer your, the religion question, which I'm going to finally circle back to that. No, it totally stripped me from any of that. And if other people want to believe that, or I'm good with that. I don't judge people. Now, there was a two-part, right? There was the what was the other question now? Because I did forget that one. What was the other one?
He wanted to know, and thank you for answering that question. Really appreciate it. Wanted to know if you have had regressive hypnosis, and I'm sure you've been asked this question a ton of times, but our listeners would love to know, Tom, if you had regressive hypnosis in any way, shape, or form, not just one time if you have, but have you had it multiple times? If you could just go into that a little bit, if you don't mind.
No, quite honestly, to really answer your question, no. However, a couple years ago, long after I was talking about this, long after this was already inducted, Yvonne Smith came over my house. We hung out and went to dinner. And she was over here with Lori Wagner, and this was when she had the camera because she actually had filmed my brother's doctor, who went on record saying, yes, there is definitely, and I can actually send you that little piece where he went on camera and said, yep, your brother had definitely had something happen. And so after she went to Indiana to interview him, we came back here, and my son is a bartender at a country club. So I'm like, let's go and get some drinks. Let's go have some dinner. And so we did. And when we came back, Yvonne was like, I would love to put you under and see if we can't bring out a little bit more. And so I said, sure, and for about 2 hours or 3 hours, not that long ago, I gave it a shot. And I would say that the only thing that I remember from that, because I've watched the recording back, was that I remember being in pain. I remember something running through my arms and shoulders and back like boiling water. And it was painful. And that's the only thing I really remember feeling, and I actually came out of it. She actually woke me up because I was kind of in a rough shape with that. And as far as anything else that happened in the past, we were pretty aware, at that time, and it wasn't as if we, what we saw or what we witnessed or became part of back in the day was brought any more clear to us, except that the pain I went through, and there was pain, and so I did try it. I don't think it really did a whole lot. It did bring me a little closer to a couple things. I mean, there was that shower curtain thing where it looked like I was looking through something very foggy, or like stained or dirty glass. And I remember these figures walking around out there, and I was laying down on something, and I was actually, my feet were up, but I was like sitting in like this weird chair. My arms were out, and I remember that pretty clearly. But I don't like mixing the hypnotic part of it, or hypnosis, with what was clear conscious memory, because I really don't know. I'm not 100% sure what that meant, or what I really saw, or what I felt. Did it really happen? Because everything else was clear conscious memory. However, I believe it did. And so, yeah.
Okay, good. Now, you're going to laugh at what I'm going to say here. Okay, so I have to ask Kevin questions.
I think Kevin might have dropped off.
Did he? Okay. Okay. So then I'll tell you.
Here.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay,
hey.
sorry, Kevin.
No.
Okay.
Okay, so let me.
I'm seeing three people on the call, and I hear Chant and Tom talking. Okay, sorry about that, Kevin.
So let me just let you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask Tom a few more questions, if he can answer just yes or no, and then I want to move on to Kevin because he had an experience too, and I want to ask him about that. So, Tom, I'll just go ahead and ask you my other questions that I was wanting to get more info on, but if you could just say yes or no, that would be fine for now. So, Tom, do you believe ETs could be us from the future?
No.
Okay, was that a no? Because you kind of broke up a little bit.
That was a no.
That was a no, got it. And then do you believe ETs in general, no matter what species they are nefarious or not? Are they evil or good?
I think there's a wide variety. I think just like we have a wide variety of personalities here and agendas here. I think that some are, some aren't.
Good.
How about the individuals you interacted with? Where would you place them on the scale, with 10 being good and 1 being evil?
I would say, they were good. I mean, 100%. I mean, there was no harm done.
Okay.
And I think that they were looking for something. They were, at the time, we were at the wrong place at the wrong time, and we came into some type of a field, and something affected us. And I think government was there, and the whole thing was a multifaceted type of thing. But at the end of the day, my son is sharp as a tack. I'm pretty healthy, yeah, and I feel privileged to have been part of it. So yeah, I think it was okay. I mean, it was just another form of life. That's all.
And I heard what you said about your son. I understand inherently, what you said about how he may have been affected. But do you, yes or no, do you feel they may be communicating with you? Meaning these ETs you came in contact with. Do you feel to this day they may still be communicating with you?
I don't know about communicating, but I think they're still around us.
Okay. And then
I have to answer that in a different form.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because of you wanted a yes or no. Because of the paranormal activity that we still have in our lives. It's coming from somewhere.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then do you feel that they abducted you? I already heard what you said. Believe me, I didn't miss it. But do you feel they may have abducted you because you were pre-selected? Because look, these guys can go up in the air and they can see who's coming. All right. It's not real difficult for them to surveil the area, especially since you said there were multiple craft involved. One may still have been up in the sky, making sure you were, not maybe you, but there was a car coming a certain direction, and then alerting the other creatures on the ground of that. Maybe they might have had better technology than that. I don't know. But the point is I wanted to know is, do you feel that they abducted you because of who you were, or because you were just in the car coming a certain direction?
I get that question a lot, and most people say it's because our entire family is basically O negative. Now, my brother's A negative. We all have the Rh negative factor. And back in the 60s, the O negative blood type was the only blood type, watched and recorded in hospitals by the U.S. government because it was the universal donor for NOM. So that means that the U.S. government also knew that we were O negative. So if there was some activity in the area and they needed that type of a blood group, which I think we all know that ties back to, there's no source of where that came from, and there's a lot of speculation about it. So if our family had O negative blood and there was 9 of us in our family and 4 of us were in one car, I'd say it was possible, certainly with the the event my mother had in 1954, and we had seen the crafts and been in, had front row seats in 66 and 67. So it wasn't the only time we've had, an event. And for a family to have 4 and all be Rh negative with 9 in the family, it certainly doesn't appear random.
And I want to jump in here with a real quick question, Tom. You said that you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And, it's a Labor Day weekend, and you could have gone anywhere. What was the reasoning to all hop in the car and drive down to the park in the first place? And do you think that maybe you were somehow drawn to it prior to?
Well, it wasn't a park back then.
Okay.
I made it a park. So
okay.
Make that, I think that needs to be cleared up too, because a lot of people believe that as well. No, it was just a shortcut home. Something else that's interesting about that night too. We stopped before we went to the diner to a place called the Meadows, which is also still there on Route 7. And one of the things we noticed was that there was not another car at the Meadows. There was no other cars on the road. It was very weird. My mother remembers, like, this is really weird. There's no other cars on the road. And it was a holiday. And it was 8:00 at night. It was at the time it was just getting dark. There was not another car on the road. And when we got to the diner and left and decided to take a shortcut back, going over the bridge probably saved us, 5 minutes or so. So she just decided to take a shortcut over the bridge. And that's why I say we ran right into it. I mean, it was swam, it was right there, 3 of them right there at around the water. And so it was over very rural land, which normally no one would have been there. It just happened to be that old rickety bridge, and my mother liked going over it. And that's why I say it was probably we just kind of ran into it. It was like random. It was an accident.
Okay.
But then again, I'm not 100% sure of that, because who knows? Yeah.
Okay, Tom, I'm glad you're talking about random and stuff like that, because I wanted to ask you a really important question. And okay, so I hope it makes sense. So I'm kind of hoping you can work with me here. And that is, I understand your blood type. And by the way, that's an often asked question of abductees, experiencers, and contactees regarding their blood type. It's a very, very important question. What I wanted to ask you is, since you feel that may have been a key factor regarding your having been selected. Interest, sure, okay. Wanted to know, how would the ETs have known you all were driving down the road then? And let me finish. So where I'm going with this is it possible that you were culled or coaxed subconsciously or by whatever means to end up going to where you were at, where the creatures were at, to be studied by them ahead of time? Because it's just odd. You're driving down the road, you happen to have that blood type. Oh, they're there. But then you're saying that your blood type is significant. How does that? How do you reconcile all that? And then I have another question for you, and that is, were the ants the bosses to the small bald-eyed hybrids? Did they appear to be boss-like to them? If there was a hierarchy, who was above the other?
It was the humanoid, if you will, that was running the show. They seemed to be workers. They just seemed to be staring into a wall.
Okay.
There wasn't a lot of movement. So I would say that they were just workers. As far as why we took the bridge, my mother would say it was because we were running late and we had to go to to get to bed early, and she wanted to save time. But at the same time, you could only go 15 miles an hour down that road. And if you took Route 7, we could have gone 50 or 60. So I am not quite sure about that. As far as the O negative blood group, I think there's more interest in why we were of interest to, this event we became so part of. I think that the O negative blood, like I said, was already tracked by our government. So when I was born, everybody in government that was interested in anom and all this kind of stuff, or had any, it was just a common thing. You can Google it, O negative blood. Everybody born in the 60s that had O negative blood, their records were sent to U.S. government. And that goes back to Command Aerospace, Sikorsky, the mining in town. So there was a lot of government in town. So if there was a multifaceted function going on here that played, that had a lot of players in it, then that means this off-world or alien entity would have, if working with the government, and they certainly were that night, they would have known these people had O negative blood because the U.S. government probably had a way of sharing that with them. So as wild as that sounds, if you've got government in the area, and a lot of it, and your blood type's O negative, and they record it, and there's some type of partnership going on, then of course they would have shared it. And there's 4 of us in a car. We're out in the middle of nowhere, so maybe there was more going on here as far as why we took that road home. It's speculation, but there, it certainly does seem to make a little sense. But of course, I can't support it, factually or anything. But you drive a good point. I mean, we have rare blood types. We were on a rare road. We did take it a lot, but that night it wasn't necessary. I think we could have just taken the highway back because, again, she said there's nobody on the road. So, yeah, I mean, it's...
then Frank, I have a question for you. We did a special on My Labs, military abductions, where it had to do with abductees and the military involved, the U.S. government involved in that. Frank, does this sound a little bit familiar to you in that regard, regarding Thomas's situation?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. By the way, if anybody wants to look that up, look up Melinda Leslie in My Labs. That's MILABS. That's an acronym. Kevin, I had a question for you. Actually, Frank, do you mind asking him questions regarding what occurred to him?
Well, yeah. Tell us about your setting there, Kevin.
Oh, you mean back in 1969?
Yes, sir.
Well, as I said earlier, I own the property, which is then called the Henlin Estate, a ranch, and I own that now. It's 190 acres, and next door is the Jimmy and George's, my neighbors. George passed away a couple years ago, but the property where I am, the 190 acres, encloses the area where Jimmy and I saw that on that evening of September 1st, 1969, and that's what I settled for years. I had not talked about or even remembered it until I had seen the Tom Reed monument, over the first one back at the Covered Bridge in Sheffield. And when I realized I knew the name, that's again when I started researching it. And so when I think about that incident, I only think of what most people see when they can't explain something. They see it, they know it's there, and they know what to make of it, and your inner instincts are at that age is to run. We ran down, as I said, and went to George and Jimmy's house, and that's when we learned, and they came out to look up, and they looked up over there on the top of the plateau, near where the cattle was. It was just kind of over there. And I can't really explain how close it was because I was pretty far away running, but I remember a kind of a light. And I felt, at least Jimmy and I both felt, that as we're running down this little path that goes across the Hollenbeck River, we were scared out of our wits, basically. And we thought, and I quote, this is what we thought it was following us. But I guess that could be that as you're going down the hill, it looks like things are coming your way, but it was there. And when we got Jim's dad out and mother, they looked at it. And they saw the same thing we did, and they called their neighbors, and the neighbors went and saw it. So whatever it was happening at the same time as that Tom and his family was doing, or something in that time. It wasn't quite dark. It was getting dark. I would have to say it was probably, I don't know, Tom, would you say it was about like 7:45 or 7:30, somewhere in that time?
Yeah, just before we ran into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And it looked like it was heading northwest, whatever it was. And, I mean, all I know is that George called my grandparents, and my grandparents said, what? Then other people called into the local authorities over here. They were getting constant phone calls for something. People were seeing what they had seen in our area within a 12-mile radius. They called the WSBS radio, which, of course, in Great Barrington was getting phenomenal phone calls about the same thing, and people were panicky. And then you look at, the government thing that I believe I remember George made a call to the air base, which is now a private airport now over in Great Barrington. It used to be a reserve force, and he called in, and as I said earlier, they did not have any aircraft or any helicopter flying that day. However, the radar technician saw something very, very peculiar, and he called it in, and they documented. They had like a kind of a like a logging, and they were logging in all these people, and people were calling in, and it just went on and on and on for a substantial amount of time that evening, and people were just panicking. And I guess I can see why they were. When you don't know what you're seeing, you're not sure what you're seeing, and then you want to forget something like that, especially at our age. Are you there?
Yep,
oh, yeah.
we're
listening to you. If you want to elaborate some more, please do. We're just intently listening to you.
Okay, well, I'm trying. Like I said, we just established what we thought, and then not too long ago, I went up there to go look at my property again. I think I saw it in the early fall. I went up there, and you can go up to the top of the plateau, and you can see exactly what it looks like it did in 1969. There's no cattle there anymore. I believe that the George took the cattle and had them buried up there. I'm not sure. I never went back up there when I was a kid. They found the second one on the right-hand side from the left one that we had saw. But if you go up there, it's a pretty barren area, and you have to be careful up there because there are bears and there are coyotes up there, and they go in school, especially the coyotes. And if you go up there, if they find you're weak, they'll go after you. So you usually have to bring like a Winchester, a rifle, or something up there to protect yourself. But I went up there recently and took some pictures of it, and it hasn't changed at all. There's no burn marks anymore, but from what people had thought they saw, I'd heard from George. But it does look like the area was flattened. There's areas on the top of the plateau that still look kind of barren, like something might have landed there. You know, it would amaze me. So I'm going to go up there again pretty soon and check it out again and see what there is up there.
Now, did I mention about, you know, you've spoken to the historical societies too, and I thought maybe it might be a interesting to share how, you know, you are more apt to look at these events in the area as a whole, rather than how so many other historians rather just focus on this one single day. And I think, you know, that's where you're very different, because you saw it. A lot of people saw it. You know that. Other historians saw it. But the difference in your approach to this thing was kind of like, and if I may say, you know, if and this is where it doesn't make sense, and I think Kevin made a great point, that if Billy the Kid had just robbed one train back in the day, he would have just been a little punk cowboy with a gun, right? But because he did it over and over and over for so many years, Billy the Kid became historically significant in history because he altered the railroad. And Kevin said to me once back in the day, you know, focusing on one day is not the full picture. You know, it's that this happened over so many years, and it's still happening in Sheffield to this day. People still.
It was in the news 3-4 weeks ago up in Pittsfield. People reported seeing something again recently. I read about that, and I'm like, you see, there's something about this area that is attracting whatever it is.
Yeah, it's not just September 1st. And there's something very, very prominent happening in that area. And even this woman, Nina, who's a pilot, has said that even the meters on homes back in the day were not, reading the electricity in the homes correctly. Pine Island Farms actually puts out and supplies power for many homes in that property through the manure and all this kind of thing that is, as farms produce. So they have a grid on their lawn. All of a sudden, boom, thing goes down. There's these wicked power surges. And so you can feel that. You walk down that dirt road. If you open up your mind and think about it, even close your eyes, you can feel something very weird in that area. There were crop circles in 2012, crop circles in 2013. The corn was bent over and burned. It wasn't like it was just crushed. People, I've got pictures. I think I showed you a picture of this big orb about the size of how big would it be? Maybe 4 foot round, hovering over the cornfield that's 15 feet tall or so, that Kevin sent you a picture of. And people, that's an actual shot. There's like several of those pictures being taken by locals in the area. And so
I'm glad you bring all that up, Tom, by the way, because it's really fascinating and key information you're sharing there. I also wanted to tell everybody who's listening that there is a wonderful website that Tom Reed created called Paraween.com. It's P's and Polly, ARAWEEN.com. And this website is dedicated to the 50th anniversary that is going to happen of the Tom Reed Off-World UFO event on October 5th of this year, so that you can hear more things like what we heard tonight, and also what Kevin and Tom are just discussing right now. Also, please go to tomreed.net. That's THOMREED.net. You will find a plethora of material there regarding the amazing Tom Reed UFO incident, making U.S. history and actually world history. I wanted to thank Frank, my co-host, Tom Reed, and also the venerable and honorable Judge Kevin Titus for having joined us tonight for this fantastic discussion regarding the Tom Reed UFO incident on September 1st, 1969.
Yep. Thanks for being so generous with your time. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. Can I add one tidbit here? One last thing. Okay. Regarding that October 5th, 50th anniversary being held by Pine Bush, something that I don't think anyone knows yet is that Pine Bush, the city of Pine Bush, and I have reached out to a lot of these witnesses. And if we're not mistaken, WSBS is going to be there, who broadcast it, Jan Green, who pounded on the door, Linda Farrell, who lived upstairs over our diner, the police officer's son, Kevin Titus, of course, is going to be there, and several others that have never, ever gone on record before are actually going to be there and introducing themselves and speaking with the attendees. So it'll be a one-time thing, and these people that we've mentioned tonight are going to be there.
Great. Sounds fantastic. And the movie, when can is that in production now? Is that in the planning stages? When can we look forward to that?
Well, First Inducted has already been shot. There's a sizzle reel for it. There is a big interest with Netflix, and we have quite a different group of producers. We've got James Keitel, who's related to Harvey Keitel, who was working with me on it. And of course, we're talking with Scotty Collins, who produces Leno's Garage. And there's another producer in Houston, which Kevin has been dealing with. So it's a matter of, to be honest with you, who wants it? Because we want to go to Netflix because Netflix is gritty. We can tell it honestly. We can, if you want to drop an F-bomb, because you can do that.
You can do that here too if you like.
Yeah,
we're on YouTube, so.
Hey, Tom, you forgot to mention this film will be substantially, a lot of it will be filmed in the actual area, on the actual site.
Oh, yeah. So what we're doing with this is we are actually interviewing all the witnesses. Have you ever seen the movie, I know, here we go again, with, Jesus. It was the guy who, Deer Hunter,
Cimino.
Dead Zone. The movie Dead Zone.
Oh, Christopher Walken.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So this film is being done and shot in that, formula. So what's going to happen is we are going to have the Jan Greens, the Kevin Titus, all these actual people who were there. They are going to be walking into a 1960s diner with a jukebox, having a coffee shake, and talking to Ben Hansen and Michael Barr and I at the diner. When they get into their story, suddenly the background changes and everybody is transported back into 1969 and watching this unveil with the audience. And then when that reenactment is over, everybody's, the background just changes and everybody's just finishing their coffee or what have you. And then another witness comes in and starts talking to Ben, and Ben's walking around with a person, and he's in modern dress, and all of a sudden, bang, now we're back in their reenactment. So it's going to transition very wowy, but the delivery and the film as a whole is going to be very grounded, honest, and very raw. So that's how it's being done.
Sounds awesome. And you're just waiting for a distributor, basically.
We are shooting the sizzle and getting backing by different producers, but because how raw they want to shoot it. They know that it's not going to be appropriate for travel or conventional television. So because we are going to show it in the brutal beatings that we got by the local police, the fights in the diner are being the stunt person who's handling the fights in the diner is Marianne Singh, who was also the stunt coordinator or choreographer for Jamie Lee Curtis in some films, but also was the woman who got stabbed in the window in the last Halloween film.
Okay.
So she is actually choreographing the fight scenes. And of course, Alana Tremblay's in it, who was in the movie Gotti with John Travolta, and she's in Puerto Rico right now shooting with Bruce Willis. So she's actually going to be one of the key people in the film too, along with Warrington Gillette, the original Jason, and many others. So we got a very good lineup of people on board, and it's going to be a very raw film. It's going to be.
So this isn't going to be a documentary then. This is going to be a movie about the.
It's a docudrama. You're going to hear the testimony, and then it's going to get into some serious. It's going to be very, very violent in a lot of ways, and it's going to be very honestly told. The fights in school that my brother and I got into, the guy who jumped up on the table in my mother's diner and broke himself out and says, "You want to see something out of this world, Nancy? I'll show you something out of this world." And how that guy got thrown out the front door of our diner. I mean, you can't show violent stuff like that, at 8 a.m., on the Disney Channel.
Right.
So,
hey, Tom, how about the violent struggle to sign the documents? That's going to look cool.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Anyway,
Kevin,
guys,
they're going to have a stunt double for you in this movie then, right?
I've been asking Tom about that, and I was like, Tom, shouldn't I be the judge? And he thinks that there's going to be an actor. I mean, you're going to see me, but there's going to be, I think you said Tom is going to be an actor who's going to play me as the judge doing that?
Yeah, because at the same time, when you were a kid at 10 years old, you can't play yourself. So,
Right.
I don't know. I've seen his pictures. He's aging very well. He might be able to pull it off. You never know.
I know. Yeah, we'll throw him in a pair of bell bottoms and a tie-dye shirt, and we'll throw him up on the hill and hope he can pull it off. No, so
right.
Yeah, so he's going to tell it, and then that he's going to be talking about it maybe on the field there and showing where it happened, and then all of a sudden everything just changes and goes back in time, and so I like the idea of that, and Netflix was all over it. So anyway, awesome. Guys, I know you want to go. I know it's been a long talk.
Yep. You've been, like I said, you've been exceptionally generous with your time. We covered a lot, and really, I think this is a case where the visuals are really going to help a lot. So I know we're really looking forward to the movie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Interject and tell Tom, thank you for letting me interrogate you. A lot of people don't realize, it's funny. People see two sides of me. They see, I act very meek and stuff. But when I want to ask questions, I will fire them off. I don't care what's happening. I will interrupt people. I'll get very aggressive. And you handled it so well. And you're such a gentleman. I just really appreciate you so much. And I also want to thank the Honorable Judge Kevin Titus. Everybody admires you greatly for all of the wonderful work you've done. You've actually written 2 historical books, you do a lot. Wanted to know if maybe you would consider a show just with you, because your life is absolutely astounding and fascinating. If Judge, if you wouldn't mind, please telling everybody the name of those 2 books that you wrote.
Oh, sure. My first book that came out 2 years ago is called Bonnie and Clyde, The Legend Lives On, about the famous outlaws. There's a new movie out with Kevin Costner called The Highwayman. It tells it very, very accurately, and my book is about the exact same thing. Things they didn't know about Bonnie and Clyde. I used to be the leading authority back in the 80s and 90s when I lived in Texas for a while in that book. And then in 2000, I was actually in Washington, D.C., 13 days after 9/11, and I was there to go see a commanding officer about a promotion. And at that very time, they were building the Pentagon, repairing it from the 9/11 attacks, and the siren went off again, and people thought we were being attacked for the second time. So what really turned out to be was started as an F2 tornado that came into Washington, D.C. and was going to an F4, but it turned northwest and went to La Plata, Maryland, which wiped that town off the face of the earth. It's still not the same to this day, and that's the title of the book, called Tornado. Washington, D.C. destroyed, and also known as 59 Minutes of Terror.
also wanted to let people know, but we'll tell them later because I'm hoping Kevin will do a show with us. But that too many presidents to count have actually written you letters. Can you just tell them why briefly before we go, why they've done that?
Sure. The two Bushes, Ford, Jimmy Carter, Cheney, Vice President, Biden even wrote me because they saw my article. They saw me in the news, and they saw my news articles, and they thought that how I portrayed the president I did with great dignity, and I don't put the politics into it. I just show the historical aspect, and they were very gracious and wrote me and asked me if I'd like to come to the White House, and that's still on the tables. I may still do that. I've got to plan it with them, but that's one of the things they do. And I also deal with people like the story of Benedict Arnold, which I have a big show coming up that's been completely sold out. So with all these movies and TV shows, I'm kind of overwhelmed, but it's amazing that people are that interested in what I have to offer and what I'm telling.
Well, we wanted to just let you know we are just so thrilled you both were on with us tonight. It's been such a fantastic show, and really want to tell everybody, please go to that October 5th, 2019 event that Tom Reed is going to have, celebrating the 50th anniversary of this event. And if you want to know more about it, again, go to paraween.com, PARAWEEN.com. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, fellas. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
You're
Frank.
welcome.
Thank
Have
you,
a
guys.
good night, everybody.
You too.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.